to crack down on grooming gangs. Speaking on a visit to Rochdale, Rishi Sunak said the measures aim to prevent victims and whistleblowers from being ignored by authorities because of cultural sensitivity and political correctness. It's after the Home Secretary singled out British Pakistani men as a particular concern. Critics say excessively focusing on race could create new blind spots when tackling child abuse.
Specific issue of grooming gangs, we've had several independent inquiries look at the incidents here in Rochdale, but in Rotherham and Telford. And what's clear is that when victims and other whistleblowers came forward, their claims were often ignored by social workers, local politicians, or even the police. And the reason that they were ignored were due to cultural sensitivity and political correctness. Now, that's not right.
Speaking exclusively to GB News, Sowella Braverman says her comments on Pakistani men were based on local reviews and reports.
It's not racist to tell the truth about what has been going on here in Rochdale or in Rotherham or in Telford. Local reviews and reports have confirmed that the grooming gangs scandal that has gone on here has been perpetrated by largely British Pakistani men. Now, it's important not to demonise a whole community, and the vast majority of British Pakistanis are law-abiding and straightforward people.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the government has been turning a blind eye to this problem for more than a decade.
So I want a government that recognises the full response that's needed here, and a government that really has been behind the curve now for a decade. And, you know, very many of the measures I was calling for 10 years ago, the government still hasn't done. And it's not tackling online issues. So there's big gaps in something which is 10 years too late. But look, we'll work with anybody to improve the situation.
Teachers in England will go on strike for another 2 days next term after rejecting the latest government pay offer. They'll walk out on the 27th of April and the 2nd of May. 98% of the NEU members voted against what they described as an insulting offer that amounted to a £1,000 one-off payment in addition to this year's rise, plus an average 4.5% pay increase for next school year. The NEU's General Secretary has appealed to the Education Secretary to negotiate a better deal. In Russia, a woman's been detained over the death of a prominent pro-war blogger in St. Petersburg. Footage purportedly shows Daria Trepova carrying a box into a cafe where an explosion killed Vladlen Tatarsky and injured 32 other people. Police have released a video of her saying she's confessed to the crime. Mr. Tatarsky was a vocal supporter of the war in Ukraine, embedding with troops and providing running commentary of the invasion. The Kremlin's described his death as an act of terrorism. Finland will officially become a member of NATO tomorrow, bringing an end to decades of neutrality. Turkey's parliament has approved the move, clearing the way for Finland to join the military alliance. Both Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO last May after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sweden's bid, though, continues to be blocked by Turkey over concerns the Nordic country continues to harbour terror groups. However, the head of NATO says Finland's membership will be beneficial to both countries.
Now with Finland as a full member, that will further increase Sweden's security and also further integrate Sweden into NATO, because Finland and Sweden are so closely integrated already.
This is GB News. More as it happens, of course, but now it's time for Patrick.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, a reminder that we will cross live to Manchester Crown Court very shortly for the live sentencing of Thomas Cashman for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. We do start, though, with a major win for GB News, and the government is cracking down on grooming gangs with tougher sentences and a new task force. And Rishi Sunak has said that political correctness won't stand in the way of tackling the problem. That's after Sowella Braverman singled out British Pakistani men as being largely responsible for the horror of grooming gangs. Braverman made that comment in an exclusive interview to GB News. Let's hear it.
ultimately, silence enabled this abuse. Silence on the part of professionals, fear of being called racist, fear about cultural sensitivities, fear about inflaming cohesion in communities. It is absolutely vital that we call out the truth of what's been going on, and that's why mandatory reporting is an important tool in the armoury of measures that we're announcing today. It's not racist to tell the truth about what has been going on here in Rochdale or in Rotherham or in Telford. Local reviews and reports have confirmed that the grooming gangs scandal that has gone on here has been perpetrated by largely British Pakistani men. Now, it's important not to demonise a whole community, and the vast majority of British Pakistanis are law-abiding and straightforward people. But it is also clear to say that in these towns, and I've met victims today who've confirmed as much, bearing out their own experience, that there have been cultural trends in the practices that we've seen, and authorities and professionals have turned a blind eye out of fear of being called racist. Political correctness can no longer be an obstacle to taking action.
I think the big line for me there was it's not racist to tell the truth. And I know that will be echoed by a lot of you. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. After many, many, many years where it's felt as though political correctness and fear of seeming racist has either slowed down or hindered both police investigations and political action when it comes to clamping down on grooming gangs. Grooming gangs are the scourge of Britain, and how many young, vulnerable, mostly working-class girls have to suffer before more is done about it. For more on this big story, I'm now joined by our political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you very much. We've been banging the drum here at GB News about this, not letting this go for a long time, and this, to be honest with you, feels like a bit of a win. Unfortunately, though, it's obviously come much too late for all the victims involved.
Yes, it does feel like if action follows, if the resources are put into these measures, that it could make a real difference. So although it's recess, although it's traditionally quiet, we're only about a month off local elections, obviously very important, both Labour and the Conservatives. And Rishi Sunak, Sowella Braverman out and about with lots to do. They feel that this sort of announcement is going to be popular with lots and lots of people, and they're not afraid about ruffling feathers.
Yeah, good. So what exactly are they actually going to do then, as far as we're aware?
So 4 main measures being outlined today. They're going to have specialist task forces, specialist trained officers going into areas with grooming gang problems that are trained in that sort of field. They're going to have mandatory reporting of the ethnicity of the perpetrators. That's new. They're going to have tougher sentencing. There's more money for whistleblowing NSPCC phone line where people can go for support. And also they're making it a legal duty for people who work with children, professionals, social workers, teachers, etc., if they have evidence or suspect that a young person is being groomed, is being sexually abused, that they have to tell the appropriate authorities. It will be an offence to just sit on the sidelines and say nothing, because, as I was saying this morning, they feel that very often people have known about what's going on and they haven't wanted to say anything. They don't want to be branded racist. They don't want to rock the boat. Yeah. And so lots of this has gone under the radar for a long, long time. Well,
and actually that was evidenced as well, not just anecdotally by talking to victims, but also from South Yorkshire Police, who did have to undergo an extensive investigation, an internal investigation and inquiry into grooming gang scandals, for example, in Rotherham, etc. And they did say that their investigations were hampered, unfortunately, as a result of worrying about political correctness and stoking racial tension. So it is a very real issue, isn't it?
It certainly is. And obviously, this is a problem that has been going on for decades under many governments. I mean, the Rochdale, that was broken, I think, in 2012 by the Times. That had been going on under New Labour. Similarly, in Rotherham, about 1,500 girls had been abused from 1997 to 2013. So nobody has got a monopoly on being right or wrong at this. Obviously, it's been pointed out that a lot of these councils were Labour councils, but Labour, by the same token, turning round and going, well, what took you so long? Keir Starmer saying, I was Director of Public Prosecutions when the Rochdale case came up, and we've been suggesting some of these measures for years. So a lot of blame being thrown around. Yeah. And important to say, of course, most sexual offences are committed by white men.
Yep.
But certainly there is evidence, there are pockets in towns like these, that British, Pakistani men heavily involved.
Look, absolutely. Thank you very much, Catherine. Catherine Forster there, our political reporter. Just a little reminder, our TV viewers will be able to see in the corner of their screens there that we will be going to Manchester Crown Court live shortly for the sentencing of Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer, Thomas Cashman. He is, as far as we're aware anyway, not going to actually attend the sentencing. That has caused a lot of you to get very angry in the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk, people saying he should be dragged there to hear the sentencing and to face up to what he's done. But we're going to go to that shortly. But for more on our original story now about the grooming gangs side of things, I'm joined by Robbie Moore, who's the Conservative MP for Keighley and Ilkley. Robbie, thank you very, very much. And I understand that there was actually a problem in your area. I went myself a number of years ago to do a bit of an investigative report about that, and it is just one of a number of areas. Frankly, I am of the mind that you could throw a dart at the map of Britain and you would probably land, whether you knew it or not, on a grooming gang. How significant is this latest development now from the Conservative Party, from Sowella Braverman, saying that they are really no longer going to let political correctness get in the way of investigations?
Well, I'm really, really pleased that the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have announced these tougher measures, and very pleased to see that the ethnicity of those that are perpetrators, but also those that are victims, is going to be collected. Because unfortunately, in Keighley, the town that I represent, and indeed across the Bradford district, grooming and child sexual exploitation has been a big issue for many years, and has not had the attention that it has deserved. And I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister has announced these new measures.
Look, why for you is it so important that the ethnicity of the perpetrators is revealed? Because the line coming out against this is that, well, is demonising a particular community, that being largely the British Pakistani community and as well largely the British Bangladeshi community, when the majority of sex offenders in this country are white. Why is it important in this context that the ethnicity is put out there?
Because I think in communities like the one that I represent in Keighley, you have to get to grips with some of the complexities that exist. And to simply ignore factors like the ethnicity is not helpful. So I have been making the case to the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister for a number of years since being elected that actually to get to grips with some of the complexities that exist within towns like I represent in Keighley, when you look at the facts of some of the gang-related grooming cases that are going through the courts, particularly when it is predominantly a minority of Asian Pakistani men targeting predominantly young white children, that we have to have a sensible conversation about that and talk about it openly. And that's why I have been a big advocate of ensuring that we do have proper systems in place where the ethnicity of both the perpetrator and the victim is collected so that we can get to grips with some of those complexities.
When I'm just looking at some of the reports here, the J report in 2014 into Rotherham, 1,400 girls, that's been updated to 1,510 girls now who were victims. The majority of those, and look, I could go on about Telford, I could go on about numerous different places in the UK, we all could. But when you look at the majority of the victims here, they are young, vulnerable, working class, white girls. And unfortunately, the ethnicity of the vast majority of the people doing the grooming gangs crimes are British Pakistani men or British men of Bangladeshi heritage as well. I just can't help but wonder whether there is racism here, and that racism has been directed at some working class vulnerable white girls who have been viewed as lesser than.
Well, I think, and that's why it's really important that we have the data, and it's frustrating that really we have not had that data to get to grips with some of the complexities, because, you know, in my mind, this is a complete difference between what is right and what is wrong. And we need to understand those issues. And that's why I'm very, very pleased that the Home Secretary is saying that political correctness will not get in the way of dealing with these issues. And unfortunately, what you have seen in places like Keighley and the wider Bradford Council is calls for that I've been asking for, like a full Rotherham-style inquiry into child sexual exploitation across the Bradford district. Dare I say, I think it would be a lot worse than unfortunately, what we have seen in Rotherham and Rochdale across the Bradford district. We have had pushback from those in positions of local power, the Labour Party, our Labour-run Bradford Council, and our Labour Mayor, Tracy Braverman, not backing my calls for having more investigation done on historic gang-related cases and indeed existing cases that are going on. Because what we actually have to do here is install trust back in those victims and those families that have been disenfranchised by the very authorities that should be there to protect them, i.e. the local authority and indeed the police. So I am really, really pleased that the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister has announced these 5 measures, because I do think that they will help.
Look, it's welcome news. It's obviously welcome news, and it does come off the back of GBNews putting out a documentary less than 2 months ago, which I would urge everybody to go and watch, Grooming Gangs, Britain's Shame. I have got to put it to you, though, if we can go into places and reveal the true extent of the problem with nothing like the amount of resources that a police force would have, or the Home Office would have, or the National Crime Agency would have, why on earth has it taken this long, and why has it taken so much pressure from news outlets like ourselves and our reporter, Charlie Peters, to get something done about it?
Well, I have to say that Charlie has done a fantastic job on this. I met Charlie in Parliament to discuss this very issue, and, well done to GB News for bringing this issue to the forefront, And yes, it is frustrating that it has taken so long. And, I've only been an MP for 3 years, but this acutely is a problem that is on people's minds in Keighley. And I've not stopped raising it as their constituency MP. And I'm pleased that the government have listened. And I think it is right that these announcements have been put in place, but that we do not just make these announcements. We make sure we follow through on these announcements, and at the end of it, make sure that those vulnerable and those victims that are at the very heart of all of this are not forgotten about, and their voices are absolutely heard. And I have to say a well done to Charlie Peters for the work that he's done in that documentary, because it was excellent.
Look, Robbie, thank you very, very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and good luck going forward. Robbie Moore there is the Conservative MP for Keighley and Ilkley. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the National Crime Agency will now act as oversight for local police forces, with specialist officers being sent into specific areas, known grooming gang hotspots, right around the UK, when issues and concerns are raised and there is perceived hesitancy to tackle the problem. We all know the story, don't we? Whenever there is news of a big grooming gang situation taking place, I personally feel as though there is more of an effort to try to dumb it down, to try to hide the true extent of the problem than there is for actually exposing it. Why is that? Well, that phrase again, for fear of stoking racial tensions, and that is wrong in my view. But I'm joined now by Maggie Oliver, who was a detective constable with Greater Manchester Police, and she criticised the way that her own force dealt with the Rochdale child sex abuse ring. She told us earlier, actually, whether she thought the government's new proposals were tough enough.
The police, the criminal justice system, CPS, the courts, they are on their knees. We are not going to bring about the monumental changes that we need without investment, without proper training of police officers. The sentencing is pitiful. The jails are full. Less than 2% of reported rapes and abuse ever reaches a court. So this, to me, I have heard Priti Patel, I have had conversations with her, with Sajid Javid, saying the same things. I really hope that this is different, that these words convert into action.
Yeah, so that is Maggie Oliver there, who was, of course, a detective constable for Greater Manchester Police. What you can see on your screens there now is the GB News documentary, and the title of it, that aired just a couple of months ago. Charlie Peters, our investigative reporter, put that together. It's called Grooming Gangs, Britain's Shame, and you can watch that now on YouTube. So go to YouTube, put GB News in. You can even just Google it, to be honest with you. Grooming Gangs, Britain's Shame. And off the back of that, ladies and gentlemen, off the back of that, we are now in a situation where the government has decided to take serious action, what we hope will be serious action. There is an interview as well with Maggie Oliver in more depth as part of that documentary, so you can listen to her in more detail there. Look, some emails filling in thick and fast. I'm just going to go quickly to Manchester, where Claire and David have been in touch, and Manchester, of course, is where one of the areas, anyway, what we were just hearing from there. At last, common sense prevails in bringing to justice the grooming gangs. The key developments are the ethnicity of the perpetrators is going to be revealed. I know a lot of people feel as though that was hidden from us. It was really hidden from us, wasn't it, for a long time, for fear of stoking racial tensions. The government is going to allow the National Crime Agency to have more of a say when it feels as though local police are dragging their feet with this stuff. And as well, crucially now, Sowella Braverman coming out and saying one thing that I think the vast majority of people were thinking, which is it's not racist to tell the truth when it comes to the true extent and the nature of grooming gangs. It's important to say that the vast majority of sexual predators in this country are white. But when it comes to the specific issue of grooming gangs, that quite clearly is not the case, and we shouldn't hide from that. A reminder, though, in other news, that we are going to cross live to Manchester Crown Court for the sentencing of Thomas Cashman for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. The update there is that it's been delayed, the sentencing, and Thomas Cashman, as we understand it, will not actually be attending in court. He's refusing to present himself even. Moving on from that, though, Donald Trump is getting ready to fly to New York City ahead of tomorrow's court appearance. GB News viewers will be able to see, there it is, Trump's plane parked on a runway in Florida. We will be going live to that as and when there are any developments, of course. I'm Patrick Christys, right here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News, the People's Channel, and a reminder that we will cross live to Manchester Crown Court for the sentencing of Thomas Cashman for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Many of you might be wondering why it's taking so long. Well, as we understand it, Thomas Cashman will not appear in court. He's refusing to attend the actual courtroom itself. Which has infuriated a lot of you, it must be said. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Cashman's defence is currently speaking, as we understand it, in court, presenting its mitigating arguments. So we will go live for the sentencing. Of course, Cashman, 34 years old, was found guilty of the murder, attempted murder, wounding with intent to do grievous bodily harm as well to Olivia's mother, and 2 charges of possession of firearms by a jury at Manchester Crown Court last week. We will bring you his sentencing shortly, amid news as well that apparently there is a £250,000 bounty on his head, which no doubt will be causing the police some sleepless nights. But there we go. We're moving on from that now because there's less than 2 hours to go before Donald Trump is due to fly to New York City, where he will appear in court tomorrow. Trump's plane is on the runway in Florida, waiting to take the former president to New York. And if you're watching on telly, you can see it on your screens now. He's the first former president to face criminal charges after he was indicted last week. New York is very much bracing for Trump's arrival, with increased security around the courthouse area. I believe we can get some reaction now from across the pond to that impending court appearance.
I don't know if there's a whole lot you can expect from the indictment. I'm sure that he will be arraigned. I'm sure that something will happen. I doubt he'll spend any time in jail, and I'd be really surprised if there are any real meaningful repercussions from it. And that's unfortunate, but that's kind of how these things work.
I'd be pretty impressed if he could get away with Secret Service knowing where he is at all times. So, it's pretty, I don't know what the right word is, ironic or just funny that, you know, this is what brings him in after so many alleged close run-ins with the law. So we don't know what's in the indictment yet, but yeah, it's pretty surreal, to be honest.
Well, this is part of it, isn't it, ladies and gents? We don't really know what's in the indictment. Rumours of around 30 different charges, and there is even talk that Donald Trump will be prevented from actually discussing it as and when he finds out. But for more on this, I'm joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is in New York City for us. Darren, I mean, look, clearly the world is watching and the world is waiting. We are going to be taking live footage of Trump Force One as and when it takes off from Florida. But what's going on where you are, then?
Well, we're all waiting here in anticipation, frankly, Patrick, of what's going to play out over the next 24 hours or so. As you say, the eyes of America, the eyes of the world here on New York. President Trump due to arrive later on this afternoon. He'll then come into Manhattan, stay in his penthouse suite in Trump Tower before tomorrow appearing in court, where essentially he's going to submit his not guilty plea, if you like, and we'll get a sense of what some of those charges are, because as you say, there's been a hell of a lot of speculation about what charges he may well face around business fraud, around this alleged hush money paid to a former porn star, Stormy Daniels, who he allegedly had an affair with nearly 20 years ago. But it will be fascinating to see what plays out in that courthouse tomorrow in Lower Manhattan. Least of all because it is the first time a current or former US president has ever been indicted for a criminal offence. It is likely he is going to be fingerprinted, he is going to have a DNA swab, probably a mugshot taken as well, expected to last for an hour, though as you just heard, he's probably not going to be handcuffed, not least of all because he's got dozens of Secret Service agents, and frankly I don't think the court thinks he's going to run away.
In Florida, and that plane is going to take off at some point, we believe anyway, possibly in the next hour and a half. So we'll be live for that, and we'll go live to that. But yes, Darren, obviously the world awaits, don't they? But it will be quite the spectacle as and when indeed it happens. And for what it's worth as well, Darren, a lot of his supporters are coming out and saying this is a witch hunt, and actually the Trump campaign has managed to raise around $5 million, hasn't it?
Yeah, fascinating this, not least of all, as you say, President Trump, his supporters have branded this as a witch hunt. They point to the fact that this prosecution has been led by a man who was elected as a Democrat, effectively elected to try and indict Donald Trump. So they will say that this is not simply a judicial process, it is a political one. But clearly the state of New York feels that it's got enough evidence to prosecute Donald Trump. But in many ways, this has actually benefited the former US president. If you look at the opinion polls this morning, particularly amongst Republican supporters, his support is up. He is now by far the front runner, way ahead of Ron DeSantis, who is the Florida governor. And the hope, I think, amongst the Trump camp is two things. First of all, that this kind of sucks the political oxygen out of the room in favour of Donald Trump. And second of all, that his supporters and soft Republicans coalesce around the former president. I think the wider question, though, is how will this go down with the whole of the US population? Because there is a sense that, frankly, at the end of the day, being indicted for a criminal law, not even if you're convicted, doesn't play well for a man who wants to office and regain the White House next year.
Absolutely. Look, Darren, thank you very, very much. Darren McCaffrey there, our man in New York, our political editor, who'll be bringing you up to date as and when Trump takes off and then lands. Look, ladies and gents, I just want to say again that we are going to go live shortly to Manchester Crown Court, where Thomas Cashman, the murderer of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel, was found guilty of that and numerous other charges as well, it must be said, will face sentencing, although it's enraged a lot of you that he actually will not be facing sentencing in person. He will not be attending court. He's refusing to attend court. That's as we understand it, and people are getting in touch on this right now. GBviews at gbnews.uk to say that he should be dragged there. How can it be that he's not able or not allowed to be dragged to court to face the music himself? We'll bring you up to date on that as and when we get some movement in the courtroom. But loads more else coming up as well. I will ask an expert whether or not the French are to blame for the delays at Dover, or is it because of Brexit? We've seen those massive queues. Look at that. You'd hate to be stuck in that, wouldn't you? And never accuse us of ignoring the stories that really matter to you. I will ask whether scientists have finally found a way to stop cows farting, and with it, as well, hitting our net zero target. But first, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thanks very much indeed. Well, as you've been hearing, the man who murdered 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel is due to be sentenced in absentia, shortly. Thomas Cashman's barrister says the defendant isn't in attendance because he's aware the CPS was singing the Queen's song, We Are the Champions, after he was convicted, and he said his client is now concerned the matter is turning into something of a circus. Cashman was found guilty of killing the schoolgirl as he chased a convicted drug dealer into her home in August last year. Well, just recently in court, we heard Olivia's mother say she misses hearing her daughter's voice and would do anything and give anything in the world to hear her chatting once again. We're expecting that sentencing to be announced fairly shortly. We'll bring it to you here on GB News. Well, in other news, the Prime Minister says victims of grooming gangs and whistleblowers have been ignored in the past because of cultural sensitivity and political correctness. Rishi Sunak outlined new measures to crack down on the problem during a visit to Rochdale, including the announcement of a new task force. That's after the Home Secretary singled out British Pakistani men as a particular concern. Speaking exclusively to GB News, Sowella Braverman said it was based on local reviews and reports.
It's not racist to tell the truth about what has been going on here in Rochdale or in Rotherham or in Telford. Local reviews and reports have confirmed that the grooming gangs scandal that has gone on here has been perpetrated by largely British Pakistani men. Now, it's important not to demonise a whole community, and the vast majority of British Pakistanis are law-abiding and straightforward people.
Thousands of schools may be forced to close for 2 days next term after teachers in England announced fresh strike action. They've announced that they'll walk out on the 27th of April and the 2nd of May after rejecting the latest government pay offer. 98% of NEU members voted against a £1,000 payment on top of this year's pay rise and a 4.5% increase for the next school year. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a bit of an update for you on the sentencing of Thomas Cashman, the man found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in Liverpool. Victim impact statements have been read out in Manchester Crown Court just now. John Pratt is Olivia's dad, and the statement is this: "I want you to know that you have changed my life. We will never be a whole family again. His children are the only reason I'm still breathing. Some days I just want to end it so I can be with Olivia again." That's Olivia's dad there. Olivia's sister, Chloe Corbell, said this: "Olivia's birth was the best present I ever received. Not only did I lose my baby sister, I lost my best friend." And Olivia's mum, Cheryl Corbell, said this: "One thing I miss most is hearing her say, 'Mum, I would do and give anything in the world to hear her chatting to me. She was and always will be my baby. I was the first person to hold my baby girl, and as her mum, I should have been the last. His actions have left the biggest hole in our lives that can never be filled." And it is also worth noting, I think, off the back of those extremely emotional victim impact statements, that Thomas Cashman is refusing to come to the dock today to hear his sentencing live. And I think that tells you a lot, doesn't it? But there we go. We will be going to that courtroom live as and when we get that sentencing, which has been delayed for all the reasons I've said before. Thomas Cashman is not going to be in attendance. And it is also worth noting as well that apparently, according to reports today, that gangsters have put a £250,000 bounty on his head. So they will have their work cut out, no doubt, in prison with him. Right, we are moving on from that now, though, ladies and gents, because long-delayed plans to build a £3 billion gigafactory in the northeast have taken a fresh twist, with a new dispute between the Australian firm buying the site and the administrator's British Volt established the gigafactory site near the port of Blythe, just north of Newcastle. Now, it was meant to help secure the future of mass car making in the northeast. It would have been a massive boost to the area, an absolutely massive one, by making the batteries to the used cars in electric vehicles, sorry, the batteries used in electric vehicles. So, has that spark been extinguished again? And it comes, frankly, as well, amid a whole host of economic news for you today, ladies and gents. And we can bring in now our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Oh, sorry, no, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry about this. We're going to have to go right now, actually, to Manchester Crown Court for the sentencing live of Olivia Pratt-Corbell's killer, Thomas Cashman.
CCTV footage captured him standing over Mr. Nee, shooting at close range. When the first gun malfunctioned, Mr. Nee was able to scramble away, but the defendant had his second gun ready. He relentlessly pursued Mr. Nee, causing him to seek refuge by barging into the home occupied by Olivia's family. Undeterred and wholly unconcerned for the safety of others, he continued to shoot at Joseph Nee, firing into that family home. Olivia, just 9 years old, heard the commotion from her bed. Unsurprisingly, she came downstairs to seek the comfort of her mother. Her last words were, "Mum, I'm scared." In a terrible twist of fate, she had stepped directly into the line of fire. As her mother battled to keep the front door closed, the defendant fired a shot that passed straight through the door, then through Cheryl Corbell's wrist and into Olivia's chest, killing her. The defendant then managed to get his hand inside the door and fired another shot inside the house. Fortunately, the door was closed on his hand and the bullet discharged into the door frame, avoiding the people inside. For the murder of Olivia, there is only one sentence that can be passed. That is a mandatory life sentence. Let there be no misunderstanding about this. The sentence will be one of life imprisonment. That means that the defendant may spend the rest of his days in prison. However, for reasons I shall explain, this is not a case which requires a whole life order. I must therefore specify the minimum term which must elapse before the defendant can apply to be released on licence. That is the shortest period that he will be required to serve in prison. There is no guarantee that he will in fact be released at that stage. That will be a matter for the parole board. I will specify sentences for the other offences, but they will be served concurrently with the sentence for murder, which will reflect the totality of the offending. The killing of Olivia Pratt-Korbel is an offence that shocked not only the city of Liverpool, but the nation. Olivia's name is likely to be remembered for many years. She should not be remembered only for her dreadful last moments. Her family have spoken today of Olivia in life and of the hopes and dreams for her future, which were so cruelly snatched away. It is plain that Olivia was a lovely little girl who cared for others and brightened the lives of her family and friends. They have suffered an unimaginable loss, which they must carry for the rest of their lives. Nothing I say or do today will ease that, but they should know that they have my sympathy. The mental scars from that night will persist forever. Cheryl Korbel must also bear the physical scars on her wrist and hand. She must have suffered terrible pain as the bullet passed through her body, but her bravery and strength is obvious. She had fought to keep the trouble outside, and she ignored the pain as she desperately tried to save Olivia. The need for her to receive emergency treatment meant that she could not be with her daughter when she died. Nobody suggests that the defendant intended to kill Olivia or to harm Cheryl. But even if he did not know Olivia was in the firing line, the same cannot be said about Cheryl. She opened her door and stepped outside to see what was happening. She immediately recognised the gravity of the situation and hurried back to get inside and secure her home. It will have been apparent to the defendant that she was not connected with Joseph Nee and was trying to keep him out. He knew, therefore, that a wholly innocent woman was by the door, and yet that is where he chose to take aim. Had he paused to think for one moment, it would have been obvious that this was a family home and that others, perhaps including children, were at risk. But the defendant was focused only on the murder of Joseph Nee, and no one else mattered to him. Precisely what lay behind the attempt on Joseph Nee's life has not emerged. The court did not hear from him, and the defendant was certainly not willing to share the truth. On his own evidence, the defendant led a criminal lifestyle in the course of which he was prepared to use threats and violence. Mr. Nee was a man with enemies who had been shot at previously. That provides the context for what happened. Whatever Mr. Nee may have done, it plainly did not justify the attempt on his life. He suffered serious injuries and is lucky to be alive. After things went so tragically wrong, the defendant went to the home of the woman who was brave enough to come to court to give evidence against him. I have made an order granting her lifelong anonymity and will not name her now. Her evidence was significant, as they both realised. She chose to do the right thing. The defendant invented a defence designed to humiliate and undermine her. It did not work. She was subjected to lengthy questioning about the most intimate details, but she stood firm. I am sorry that she had to endure that, but endure it she did, and her courage is to be applauded. In sentencing for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, I must follow the statutory provisions set out in Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020. Paragraph 2(2)(b)(a) of Schedule 21 provides that the starting point for the murder of a child involving a substantial degree of planning or premeditation is a whole life order. I have considered whether that applies to this case, but have concluded it does not, because the planning and premeditation was not directed at the child. There is no doubt, though, that the seriousness of the murder, taken in combination with the other offences, is particularly grave, such as to require a lengthy minimum term. The starting point for any murder involving a firearm is 30 years, as set out in paragraph 3 of Schedule 21. I must then consider the aggravating and mitigating factors set out in paragraphs 9 and 10, together with any other relevant circumstances. There can be no doubt that this shooting involved a significant degree of planning and premeditation. I bear in mind that many, if not most, murders involving firearms involve some premeditation, and that is already accounted for in the starting point. The evidence in this case demonstrates planning going well beyond that. The defendant had sourced 2 guns, presumably to allow for the possibility of one misfiring. He knew what van Joseph Nee was driving, and I am sure that he was looking out for him earlier that day. Having spotted his van, he changed his clothes and concealed his face before heading towards him, only to realise that Mr. Nee had left. Later, having seen the van again and realising Mr. Nee was likely to remain where he was until the end of the televised football, the defendant again changed his clothes, got into position and lay in wait. This was a targeted, planned execution attempt. It commenced in a residential street. Even as Mr. Nee ran for his life, the defendant ruthlessly pursued him. He then fired more shots as Mr. Nee tried to take cover in a determined effort to complete what he had set out to do. It is accepted on the defendant's behalf that Olivia was a particularly vulnerable victim because of her age. I do not necessarily agree that Olivia's age made her more vulnerable to being killed in these specific circumstances, but it is academic to debate whether the case comes within paragraph 9b. The real gravity of this case is that a young child was shot and killed in her own home. As children do, Olivia was coming downstairs to seek reassurance. Cheryl Corbell should have been able to give that reassurance and to tuck Olivia back into bed. What's happened instead was chilling and strikes fear not only into the immediate community, but also into the minds of other children and their parents. Shooting into a family home with no regard for who may be caught in the crossfire is obviously a very significant aggravating factor which must be reflected in the minimum term. None of the statutory mitigating factors apply in this case. While right that there was no intent to kill Olivia, the fatal shot was fired with the clearest possible intent to kill, and I have determined that the shooting was premeditated. The fact that the intent was directed towards Joseph Nee offers no mitigation. Had the defendant planned to kill Olivia, he would have been facing a whole life order. Even had the defendant killed Joseph Nee rather than Olivia, the premeditated nature of the killing, the use of 2 firearms, and the firing of shots into a family home would still have required a substantial uplift. The fact that it was Olivia who died undoubtedly makes the offence more serious still. Further, I am not considering this offence in isolation. The defendant must also be sentenced for the other offences. I shall take care not to double count features that are common to counts 1 to 3. I am very conscious that the shot that killed Olivia was one of those aimed at Joseph Nee while attempting to kill him, and was the same shot that wounded Cheryl Corbell. However, I must reflect the fact that the harm caused was not limited to killing Olivia, but also included serious injury to 2 other people. Had I been sentencing the defendant for the attempted murder of Joseph Nee alone, I would have imposed a life sentence because of the obvious risk of serious harm he poses to members of the public. I agree with the submissions that this is a Category A2 case within the relevant sentencing guideline. That gives a starting point of a determinate sentence of 30 years and a range of 25 to 35 years. Even in the context of a Category A case, the offence is aggravated by the planning, the relentless pursuit of Mr. Nee, and the use of 2 firearms. So I will select a figure towards the upper end of the range. In setting the minimum term to be served on a discretionary life sentence, the notional term should be discounted by 1/3 to reflect the early release provisions which apply to a determinate sentence. I need not dwell further on the minimum term for count 2, since it will make no practical difference to the minimum term which must be served, which will be that imposed on count 1. For count 3, wounding Cheryl Corbell with intent to do grievous bodily harm to another, the offence falls into category A2 in the relevant guideline, giving a starting point of 7 years imprisonment and a range of 6 to 10 years. The offence is aggravated by being committed against a woman in her own home, and I consider that a sentence at the top of that range is appropriate. The firearms offences charged as counts 4 and 5 are part and parcel of the other offences. It would be wholly artificial to consider the appropriate sentence for these two offences had they stood alone. They are category A1 offences within the relevant guideline. The sentences on these counts will not impact on the overall term the defendant must serve. It is therefore unnecessary to say more, and I will simply adopt the starting point suggested by the guideline, namely 18 years imprisonment. I have explained the approach to the sentences for the individual offences only so that the defendant and others know how I have arrived at the eventual sentence which I impose. The reality is that the defendant's offending cannot be compartmentalised, and the minimum term to be served will reflect the totality of his offending. The defendant murdered Olivia Pratt Corbell, a young child, in her own home. He did so in the course of attempting to murder Joseph Nee as part of a planned and sustained attack involving the use of 2 firearms. He caused serious injuries to Mr. Nee and came close to killing him. He also shot Cheryl Corbell, causing her significant physical injury, to say nothing of the psychological scars he caused her and others. That is the basis on which he will be sentenced. The defendant is now aged 34. He is not of previous good character. Any attempt to rely on an absence of any significant history of violence has to be viewed in the context of what he told the jury. He made it quite clear that he was a criminal who used threats and violence when it suited him. Although I will not treat that as aggravation, there is no mitigation to be found in his history. The defendant has not acknowledged his responsibility for Olivia's death and so has demonstrated no remorse. His failure to come into court is perhaps further evidence of that, although I make it clear that this has not caused me to increase his sentence. The defendant is a father, and I accept that being taken away from his children is a loss for him and for them. It is a loss that he is wholly responsible for. There is, in my judgment, no real mitigation available to the defendant. I now pronounce the sentence. On count 1, for the murder of Olivia Pratt Corbell, the sentence will be life imprisonment. The minimum term will be 42 years, less the time the defendant has already spent on remand. On count 2, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the sentence is life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. On count 3, wounding Cheryl Corbell with intent to do grievous bodily harm to another, the sentence is 10 years imprisonment. On counts 4 and 5, the firearms offences, the sentence is 18 years imprisonment on each. All those sentences are to be served concurrently, meaning that the shortest period the defendant will be required to serve before he can be considered for early release from the sentence of life imprisonment is 42 years, less the 182 days he has served on remand. After he has served that minimum term, he can only be released if the parole board decide that is appropriate. He would then remain on licence for the remainder of his life. The statutory surcharge will be added to the record. Thank you. That completes my sentencing remarks and it completes the sentencing hearing.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, so that was Justice Amanda Yip KC, who was serving up the sentence to Thomas Cashman there, who's the murderer of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. I'm going to summarise the sentences in entirety and then tell you what the minimum is there in case you didn't pick it up. So for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, life imprisonment with a minimum of 42 years. For the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, life with a minimum of 22 years. For the wounding with intent of Cheryl, who is Olivia's mum, that is a 10-year prison sentence, and for the 2 firearms offences, that's 18 years. Now, those sentences are going to be served concurrently, which means that the shortest period of time that Thomas Cashman could be allowed out is 42 years. We will serve a minimum of 42 years minus the 182 days he has already spent on remand. Just to summarise there what Justice Yip was saying, she acknowledged that Thomas Cashman has shown no remorse and taken no responsibility for any of these offences. And she did stress that his refusal to attend the sentencing today, refusal to present himself in court for the sentencing, to face the music really, had not added to his sentence, but she did make a note of it. A lot of people will be saying, why isn't there a whole life order? Well, it's pretty straightforward really, that. Because he did not plan or conduct the premeditated killing of a child, i.e. Olivia, i.e. she was not the intended target, there is no whole life order that can be served. 42 years minimum is obviously still a pretty lengthy time, given that he's 34 years old at the moment. The victim impact statements were absolutely harrowing, and they were made reference to by Justice Yip, who said how the psychological trauma that this has caused to Olivia's mum, her sister and Olivia's father. Mrs. Justice Yip said that Olivia was clearly a lovely little girl who cared for others and brightened the lives of her family and friends, and that Thomas Cashman should have known that Cheryl, who's the mother, was obviously in the firing line as he shot into the house. She said that he sourced 2 guns, which, as she said, was presumably to account for one of them misfiring, which again shows a degree of premeditation, a massive degree of premeditation when it comes to the planned execution, a targeted, planned, attempted execution of Joseph Nee, who was the intended target of all of this. So there we go. Those sentences again. Thomas Cashman will serve a minimum of 42 years in prison for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the wounding with intent of Cheryl Corbell, and 2 firearms offences. So that's the latest from Manchester Crown Court. To give his reaction to that sentencing is former Met police officer Graham Wetton. Graham joins me now. Graham, thank you very much. Well, look, what do you make of that?
A really significant sentence. And I think if you actually listen to the judge's sentencing remarks, as you just alluded to, she covered it really well. She covered the premeditation aspect. She covered why she couldn't give a whole life tariff based on the sentencing guidelines, but she did give a very, very significant sentence. 42 years makes him around 76 before he's even considered for parole. That doesn't mean he comes out then. It means he has to go before the parole board and then be considered for release. So a really significant sentence. I think she summed it up very well.
What do you make of the fact that Thomas Cashman didn't present himself in court today to face the music?
Again, it's down to the justice system, and the police have absolutely no influence in this at all. I've seen some comments on social media about the police should drag him into court. The police acts on the guidance of the judge at Crown Court trial, so they're literally there to act on the guidance, the instructions of the judge and the justice system. And some people just refuse to come into court. It doesn't really show anything for the victims. It's not victim-centred, in my personal opinion. Then, the actual victims, the family, I would suspect, would like to see him sentenced, like to see his reaction, and actually have him hear the victim impact statements. He's sat in his cell. He's been taken to the court, so he's there. He, from what I've seen, he appears to be in the building. He's just refusing to come out.
And actually, again, there were reports earlier today that there was around a £250,000 bounty on his head from other gangsters, with a view, presumably, to keeping him quiet, because he obviously knows a lot about the underworld, doesn't he, and everything. So he arrived at court with a ring of armed steel from the police. But we're going to touch on that a little bit later with someone who's a former gang member who's going to tell me a bit more about that. I just want to hear from you a little bit when it comes to actually the response, the bravery of a woman who will have lifelong anonymity, who actually did do the right thing and essentially shop him, basically, and give evidence, didn't she, at that court, under what can only have been a huge amount of pressure. And Justice Yip alluded to that. Your thoughts on the fact that this lady has come forward under extreme pressure and circumstances, at extreme danger to her own life, and done the right thing and helped police? Because without her, I'm not sure they would have necessarily got to the result they have.
Yeah, the judge alluded to that. She actually mentioned her, specifically commended her for actually coming to court, commended her testimony, how significant it was, the pressure she was put under, the cross-examination she suffered at court, and the fact she's actually given her a lifelong anonymity award. And she will now be in a witness protection scheme. So that's a significant change in her personal circumstances. Exceptionally brave, standing bravery to come forward to court and actually stand in court in front of everybody and give her testimony and be cross-examined live in court. Astonishing. But the judge, as you've mentioned, the judge has recognised this and specifically commented on the fact that how crucial that piece of evidence was in this case.
No, indeed, and I know we were reporting on it for a long time. This case really gripped the nation, not just because of the harrowing nature of the victim involved, and by victim in this, I'm, of course, talking about Olivia Pratt-Corbell. I know that Cheryl was shot and wounded, Olivia's mum. I know that Mr Nee as well, Joseph Nee, was also very badly wounded. The judge there said he was lucky to be alive, but the real victim in all of this, of course, is Olivia. And that made the case extra shocking. You know, a little girl, 9 years old, shot, murdered in her own home. But there was, of course, the mystery around it, because for a long time there was a manhunt, for a very long time, and that spoke, I think, towards an immense amount of secrecy in the underworld, in that criminal community. Eventually, they did manage to get Thomas Cashman. That figure now of around £250,000, which reportedly is the bounty on his head, as it were. What's going to happen to him in prison now? Is he going to be given solitary confinement, do you think? Is he going to have constant police protection? How do you see that going? Because let's be honest, he's in there for a minimum of 42 years.
It won't be the police. It will be down to the prison authorities now. He's their responsibility. He's a convicted sentence prisoner. So it's completely down to the prison authorities how they make him secure and safe within that establishment or whatever establishment he's in. So there will be some liaison with police around information and intelligence, but it will be the prison authorities who will manage his security and safety while he's in their custody.
And I imagine that's going to be quite difficult to do 24/7, but we'll have to wait and see. Look, just one more with you, if that's all right, Graham. Appreciate your time. Does this feel like justice to you, do you think? Do you think that, of course, Olivia's family are never going to be happy about anything, given the nature of everything, but do you think this is the best result they could have got?
Yeah, I think it's a really good result. I think that's a significant sentence. When you look at sentences that are passed in courts every single day for really serious offences, this is a significant period of time. I think that the investigation team, who worked tirelessly and really dedicated on this, that was a really difficult, as you mentioned, complex investigation. CCTV they were trawling through, witness statements, clothing, the fact they didn't find a gun or even a lot of forensic evidence. Yeah. A really difficult, challenging investigation. I think they will be thrilled they've got such a significant sentence. There were reasons, legal reasons, why it couldn't be a whole life order. I think they've got the next best thing with 42 years.
Yeah, Graham, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure, that. Thank you. Graham Westonhaugh's former Met police officer, just reacting to the news that we brought you moments ago, live from Manchester Crown Court, which was the sentencing of Thomas Cashman. Just quickly again, minimum of 42 years in prison for a collection of offences, including the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. We're going to go back live now to Manchester, to outside Manchester Crown Court, and speak to GB News' North West reporter Sophie Reaper, who was inside for that hearing and has been there from start to finish pretty much from this harrowing case. Sophie, what's the latest where you are, please?
Well, as you mentioned there, Patrick, Thomas Cashman has now been sentenced. He refused to appear in court this afternoon, but Justice Yip consented to sentencing him in his absence. Now, there were 5 charges that he was found guilty of by the jury, and we heard the sentencing for each of them. So on count 1, the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, a minimum of 42 years. On count 2, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, he received life imprisonment, a minimum of 22 years. Count 3, the wounding with intent of Cheryl Corbell, that was a sentence of 10 years. And on counts 4 and 5, the possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life, that was 18 years for each. Now, those sentences will be served concurrently, which means he'll serve a minimum term of 42 years before he can be considered for release. And even then, he would only be released if the parole board were to allow it. Justice Yip described in the process of sentencing a targeted, planned execution attempt. She said the defendant was focused only on the murder of Joseph Nee. He didn't care about anyone else. Now, before we heard the sentencing today, we also heard statements from members of Olivia's family, from her dad, her mum and her sister. Olivia's mum, Cheryl, she took the stand in the courtroom and clearly she was heartbroken. She called Cashman a coward, saying his actions have left the biggest hole in our lives that can never be filled. There was a statement read out by Olivia's dad, John Pratt. At one stage it said, his children are the only reason I'm still breathing. Some days I just want to end it so I can be with Olivia again. Now, we just want to confirm once again that Thomas Cashman will receive a minimum of 42 years in prison for that man who killed Olivia Pratt-Corbell.
Sophie, thank you very much. Sophie Reaper there, GB News' North West reporter outside Manchester Crown Court, bringing you the latest following the sentencing of Thomas Cashman, who will serve a minimum of 42 years in prison. Look, the reaction is coming in thick and fast here, ladies and gents. GBviews at gbnews.uk. I think we can predict the headlines tomorrow, can't we? Which will be coward, OK? Because Thomas Cashman refused to actually present himself in the courtroom, refused to walk up those steps into the dock to hear the victim impact statements. This is a man, by the way, who has not taken responsibility for it, as the judge said, has not shown any remorse for it whatsoever, couldn't even bring himself to sit in the dock there and hear the real-life impact that his actions have had on Olivia's mum, Olivia's Olivia's sister and Olivia's father as well. He couldn't bring himself to do that, and a lot of you have been getting in touch saying, Patrick, this guy is an absolute coward. That's from Cliff. And Stuart makes the point. For 42 years, which is the minimum term that Cashman will be spending in prison, for 42 years, the UK taxpayer will have to pay to keep this scumbag alive. That's from Stuart. So there we go. Anyway, right, let's get some thoughts now. I think this is important, actually, and it's an important angle on this. From Sicarius McGarth, who is a reformed gang member and is a youth rehabilitator. And thank you very, very much for joining us on this. I believe I can go to now. Yes, thank you so much. So, look, first and foremost, what do you make of the sentence that's been handed down today? A lot of reaction to it not being a whole life order. The judge made it clear that that was impossible under legal guidelines. A lot of reaction from people to Thomas Cashman not presenting himself in court today to face the music. What's your initial takeaway on the 42 years he's been given?
Yeah, I personally thought it was quite lenient myself. Although it's a lengthy sentence in the circumstances, I thought it was quite lenient because there's other people who are getting similar sentences for killing other gang members. We can't escape the fact in this case that it's a young, innocent child who's been murdered. And I feel, taking that into account, the sentence is lenient.
Can you talk to me a little bit, if that's all right, about the gang world that Thomas Cashman lived in? Bearing in mind that there's a £250,000 bounty on his head, as we understand it, what you can see happening there with that. But is there this code of silence that takes place in the Liverpool gang world?
Yeah, I can't comment on the world he lived in himself because I'm not aware of that. But yeah, there is a code of silence, and I think that was demonstrated by the fact that the police have to go to the courts or take legal action to get people to cooperate, for example, disclose CCTV. So that wall of silence and that reluctance to cooperate with the police has been demonstrated in this case from what the media reports.
Do you think that the prison officers will have quite a hard time keeping Thomas Cashman safe now for the next 42 years or not?
I'm not so much sure on that. And, you know, people are saying the media have reported that there's been a substantial amount of money offered to harm him. I'm not sure as to how true that is. I couldn't say whether that's accurate or not. I don't know. It could just be speculation. Who knows? But there's going to be some people in the prison system that don't like him for what he's done. But then I think the vast majority are not going to be fazed by it.
Yeah, just expand on that a little bit for me, please, because I'm quite keen to find out a bit more about... We hear a lot about the kind of hierarchy in prison, right? And I've obviously never been, thankfully. But when it comes to child killers, etc., I mean, will there presumably be quite a lot of people in prison who will take a very dim view of what he's done?
I don't think a lot now, because the moral standards and the moral codes has diminished within prisons and within society amongst criminals. So no, I don't think there'll be a lot. There'll be a minority who will take a dim view towards what he's done. Or I think the majority won't really be fazed by it.
I suppose there's different kinds of offences against children, aren't there, as well? And I suspect some of the other ones might be taken a more dim view of than this one, unfortunately. Yeah, and can I just ask what you reckon this will do to the drug dealing world or the gang world, etc., in Liverpool? I mean, the Nation has zoomed in on it recently, and do you think this will have any impact on the way that people operate in Liverpool?
Yeah, I think the case as a whole would have impacted, given the level of police presence and the investigation. So there would have been a lot of people that were put on the back foot. So it would have had some impact. But I think the community needs to recognise the fact that drugs are the primary driving factor behind the discharge of firearms in Merseyside and in other cities. So when people are taking social drugs such as cocaine or even having a spliff of cannabis, they need to understand where their money's going back into. It's going back into funding weapons, the purchase of weapons, which then has a ripple effect and results to matters like this occurring, where there's innocent children being murdered.
Yeah, exactly. And can I just ask you, you obviously do a huge amount of work and you are an incredibly reformed character. I really appreciate you coming on and being able to, frankly, talk with a lot more honesty and integrity about this topic than I ever could through your own lived experience. But, you know, you're on national television now. If you wouldn't mind just saying to anyone who's watching this, who might have this on in the background or whatever they're doing, listening on radio, who is maybe young and thinking about getting involved or is involved maybe in lower-level drug dealing, lower-level gang culture, etc., what would your message be to them in the wake of Thomas Cashman being sentenced to 42 years in prison for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell and 4 other offences? What would your message to people who are just flirting with gang culture be?
Yeah, well, there's only 3 ways it's going to end. It's going to end in death, a long prison sentence, or it's going to end in addiction. So there's no positive ends to gang life, gang culture. And the sentence in this case, even though it's lenient, it demonstrates that the authorities and the courts are not willing to tolerate this type of behaviour. And it's so easy for anyone, when they're firing a gun, to harm innocent people, even though it's not intended.
Mm. Yeah, and look, it's strong advice. Sorry, I hope you don't mind me just one more. It's just that you re-emphasised there about the idea that you think this is a lenient sentence. Can I ask, what would you have given him? I mean, the judge is saying that there's no way that she could have done a full life tariff. That's just the way the law is, because he didn't actually premeditate to kill Olivia Pratt-Corbell. She was the collateral damage, unfortunately, in this. Some people in my inbox are talking about the death penalty and stuff. I don't know. What would mean a non-lenient sentence for you, do you think?
Well, I was expecting a whole life order, and I don't know the law as to what the judge is quoting, but if we look at it in that context, he was convicted of murder of a child, and I think that justifies a whole life order. And if it doesn't, if the judge was unable to pass that, which I'm not sure she was or she wasn't, then Parliament and MPs need to be revisiting this and making amendments to the sentencing process, because anyone who murders a child in this way, then the least punishment that needs to be passed is a whole life order, and anything less won't suffice in deterring people, because 42 years, people still have the opportunity to get out and have some freedom. You know, in 42 years' time, I think this perpetrator will be maybe in his 70s, perhaps. So, you know, he could still get out and have a couple of years left of his life where that young child never has that opportunity, and the family will never have that opportunity to live a normal life again. So why should perpetrators be given that opportunity with any prospect of release? Why should that be allowed? And I was once a perpetrator myself, and I could have possibly been in this situation where I harmed an innocent child. It could have happened, because there was many times when I indiscriminately fired firearms. So I could have also, you know, it could have resulted in something similar to this. But I'm saying from a perpetrator's perspective, having been there, that 42-year sentence is nowhere near sufficient. And if the judge weren't able to pass any higher sentence, then Parliament need to revisit the sentencing of perpetrators like this.
Look, I really appreciate that. An incredibly honest and heartfelt testimony from yourself there. And like I said before, you know, a tremendous insight into the situation, really. And obviously, like you said, you don't know Thomas Cashman's precise circumstances in the exact world that he operated in, but he certainly, with respect, got a lot closer to it than I have, and I dare say a lot of our viewers and listeners will have done as well. And it's really fascinating to actually hear your perspective on it. So thank you very much to Cerys McGrath there, who's a reformed gang member and is a youth rehabilitator. And it's strong stuff. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, there we go. We hope to hear from Olivia's family very shortly, and we'll bring you that as and when, if we get it, and we'll go back live to the steps of Manchester Crown Court to take that statement. So keep your eyes and ears peeled. There's every chance we're going to have to cut away from whatever we're talking about and take you back there. But of course, that is the right thing to do. But we're going to return now to another massive story here for us on GB News, and it's actually a big win for us here at GB News, because the government is cracking down on grooming gangs, not before time, with tougher sentences and a new task force. And Rishi Sunak has said that political correctness won't stand in the way of tackling the problem. And that is after Sowella Braverman singled out British Pakistani men as being largely responsible for the horror of grooming gangs. How many times have we seen political correctness getting in the way of this, people? People being too afraid of being called racist to actually do something about it. Well, Braverman actually made this comment in an exclusive interview with GB News.
It's clear that this has been a scandal that has gone on for far too long. Vulnerable girls in troubling circumstances have been dismissed, have been ignored when they have justifiably complained about sexual abuse, exploitation, being drugged or being raped. And there has been a failure on the part of state agencies, social workers, teachers, the police, to take seriously those concerns. It's on the back of this challenge and real problem, which is ingrained in some of our institutions, that the Prime Minister and I have now announced a series of package which take us forward, which will ensure that there's now a mandatory duty on child safeguarding professionals to report when they have concerns about exploitation or vulnerabilities. I think that will make a big difference in the action that will be incumbent on professionals to take.
We saw in Rotherham and in Rochdale, in those scandals, that government officials and police officers were not prosecuted, despite reports proving that they knew what was going on. Do you hope that with your reforms, and with mandatory reporting in particular, that an ethos and a culture of accountability will be introduced?
Yes, I think that imposing a duty on professionals will lead to a culture change, will lead to professional change. Ultimately, silence enabled this abuse, silence on the part of professionals, fear of being called racist, fear about cultural sensitivities, fear about inflaming cohesion in communities. It is absolutely vital that we call out the truth of what's been going on, and that's why mandatory reporting is an important tool in the armoury of measures that we're announcing today.
Yesterday, when you spoke about your incoming list of reforms, you said that, I think correctly, that British Pakistanis are disproportionately overrepresented in this kind of child abuse, with one Labour politician describing this commentary as dog whistle politics. What do you make of this?
It's not racist to tell the truth about what has been going on here in Rochdale or in Rotherham or in Telford. Local reviews and reports have confirmed that the grooming gangs scandal that has gone on here has been perpetrated by largely British Pakistani men. Now, it's important not to demonise a whole community, and the vast majority of British Pakistanis are law-abiding and straightforward people. But it is also clear to say that in these towns, and I've met victims today who've confirmed as much, bearing out their own experience, that there have been cultural trends in the practices that we've seen, and authorities and professionals have turned a blind eye out of fear of being called racist. Political correctness can no longer be an obstacle to taking action.
What would you say to all the women and girls who, until now, have been too afraid to come forward with their story because they didn't believe that the police or the government would support them?
I've met some women and girls today who were victims of child sexual exploitation, and they have explained their experiences of being dismissed, being ignored, not being believed. I urge victims to have confidence in the police, in the authorities. We are leading a step change. The measures that we're announcing today, whether it's mandatory reporting, whether it's a new task force, bringing together specialist police agencies and expertise to crack down on this practice in communities, or whether it's greater data, or whether it's toughened up sentences, represents a real step forward in supporting victims. This government is on the side of victims, and I urge them to come forward. That's how we'll secure justice for them.
OK, so that's our Home Secretary Sowella Braverman there, being interviewed by our very own Charlie Peters. And the reason right at the start of covering this particular story, I said it's a big win for GB News, is because of the tireless work by Charlie Peters as an investigative reporter to look into and really shine a light on the historical wrongs of grooming gangs and what is, frankly, still happening, and really trying to keep the pressure on and hold people's feet to the fire to do something about it. And, frankly, today, this might have happened, because I'm joined now by our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who can outline in a bit more detail there, really, what Sowella Braverman has promised. There are practical measures, so more police, National Crime Agency, but also, crucially, no longer letting political correctness or fear of racism getting in the way of getting to the bottom of grooming gang issues.
Yes, the government talking really tough on this, announcing this raft of measures, and assuming the resources are put behind it could potentially lead to a dramatic change. So, Sowella Braverman has come in for quite a lot of flack. Tracy Brabin, the Labour Mayor of West Yorkshire, has said this is dog whistle politics, because Sowella Braverman has specifically mentioned the fact that British Pakistani males have made up quite a large proportion of grooming gangs in areas like Rochdale, Rotherham, etc. Now, that is correct. Of course, it's also correct that the majority of sexual offences are committed by white men, but that's because only 14% of the population are non-white in this country. So it's a battle that the government are going to tackle head-on. They don't care about the backlash. They really feel that this has been swept under the carpet for a long time, and that too often people in positions of power, police officers, social workers, etc., have known that terrible things have been done to particularly working-class, vulnerable white girls, and have turned a blind eye, have said nothing, because they don't want to be branded as racist, and they're adamant that this has got to stop.
So from a practical policing point of view, then, what's going to happen that we're aware of? There are going to be more resources?
So, yes, so they're launching this task force today. Home Secretary and the Prime Minister were in Rochdale and in Leeds. They're going to basically parachute specialist police into areas where there's grooming gangs that have experience of working in this field. There's going to be tougher sentences when the perpetrators are brought to justice. Then they're going to collect the ethnicity of all the people that are charged and found guilty of these crimes, so that they can have a clear evidence-based record of who is committing them. And also there'll be a legal duty on people in professional jobs with a duty of care for children, so police, social workers, etc., if they have evidence that grooming is being carried out, that they legally have to speak up or face a penalty. I think what's astonishing is most people, I would imagine, would assume that that would happen anyway, and that people in those sort of positions would do the right thing. But obviously there's been a lot of I felt under a lot of pressure to say nothing.
Look, Catherine, thank you very much. As ever, Catherine Forster, our political reporter. Now, yes, if you are just joining us, that is, look, it's the kind of win that you never want to have, because you would hope that issues like this, in terms of grooming gangs, never actually came to fruition in the first place. But nonetheless, it is a big result, I think, for anyone who really cares passionately about the grooming gang issue and stopping it, and who feels as though it's not only been let down in the past, but things have actually been buried, have been willfully ignored, have been just discarded. And this has been evidenced as well. It's not just potentially people like yourself at home saying it, or people like me spouting it out on the television. No, I mean, there have been reports where police forces have said, we didn't want to stoke racial tensions. We didn't want to reveal the ethnicity of people. We didn't want to maybe drill down into it as much as we possibly could have done. So we've all known that it's been happening for a very, very long time. Today could well mark a big change in the way that grooming gangs are dealt with and combated and stopped in the United Kingdom. And hopefully the industrial-scale abuse of mostly working-class, vulnerable white girls I mean, any girl really, but I'm just going again off the demographics of the victims here, by, in the case of grooming gangs, mostly men of British Pakistani heritage, can stop. We won't be able to hide this situation anymore. But there we go, that's the latest from that. GB News has led the way in exposing the horror of the grooming gangs. And you can watch our documentary, Charlie Peters' documentary on grooming gangs, Britain's Shame. That's available right now on YouTube. And I don't think it's any coincidence that just a couple of months after that went out and it got massive amounts of views, and we've been really banging the drum here for a very long time on it. I don't think it's any coincidence now that something is actually being done about it. So there we go. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm going to give you a reminder now of our top story, and that is that Thomas Cashman has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 42 years in prison for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Bell. We do hope to hear from Olivia's family very, very shortly on the steps of Manchester Crown Court. So we'll take that to you as and when. So we might have to drop out something else to go to that, so be aware. But moving on, Donald Trump is getting ready to fly to New York City ahead of tomorrow's court appearance. GB News viewers can see Trump's plane, Trump Force One, as it's affectionately known, parked on a runway in Florida. So it's currently parked on a runway in Florida. It's due to take off in less than an hour. We will be there, and I'll also be talking to a former member of Donald Trump's inner circle. He's going to be watching it with us live and giving his reaction. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. We are Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel. Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. A reminder of our top story. In the last hour, Thomas Cashman has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 42 years for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. We hope to hear from Olivia's family very shortly. We'll be going back to Manchester Crown Court as we expect them to make some form of statement. Like I said, we will take that live here. In other news, and this has just broken, Timothy Schofield, the brother of this Morning Star Philip Schofield, has been found guilty of sexually abusing a teenage boy over a period of 3 years. 54-year-old Timothy Schofield was charged with 11 sexual offences involving a child between October 2016 and October 2019, and a jury at Exeter Crown Court has found him guilty of all counts. That news has just broken in the last few moments. There's lots more still to come right here on GB News, the People's Channel, between now and 5 o'clock. We're going to debate whether the French is to blame for the delays at Dover or if it's because of Brexit. You would not want to be stuck in that, would you? Talks of 17-hour delays. Can you imagine having a screaming kid in the back of your car as well, with trying to get them on holiday? Absolute shocker. We'll give you the latest on that. And yes, of course, as I've said, there will be more reaction to the sentencing of Thomas Cashman, a minimum of 42 years in prison for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, as well as 4 other very serious offences. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Well, good afternoon. And as you've just been hearing, the top story today and breaking news this hour is that Thomas Cashman, who murdered 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool, has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term to serve of 42 years. He shot the schoolgirl as he chased a convicted drug dealer into her home in August last year. In court, Olivia's mother said she misses hearing her daughter's voice and would do anything and give anything in the world to hear her chatting to her again. In sentencing, Justice Amanda Yip said Olivia's life was cruelly taken.
The killing of Olivia Pratt-Corbell is an offence that shocked not only the city of Liverpool, but the nation. Olivia's name is likely to be remembered for many years. She should not be remembered only for her dreadful last moments. Her family have spoken today of Olivia in life and of the hopes and dreams for her future, which were so cruelly snatched away.
Well, in some other breaking news today, the brother of the television presenter Philip Schofield has been found guilty of sexually abusing a teenage boy. Timothy Schofield was charged with 11 offences involving a child between October 2016 and October 2019. The 54-year-old has been remanded in custody and will be sentenced next month. And the Prime Minister says victims of grooming gangs and whistleblowers have been ignored in the past because of cultural sensitivity and political correctness. Rishi Sunak outlined new measures to crack down on the problem during a visit to Rochdale, including the announcement of a new task force. And thousands of schools may be forced to close for 2 days next term after teachers in England announced fresh strike action. Teachers have announced they'll walk out on the 27th of April and the 2nd of May after rejecting the latest government pay offer. 98% of NEU members voted against a £1,000 payment on top of this year's pay rise and a 4.5% increase for the next school year. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News. Now back to Patrick.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick snapshot then of today's markets before we return to Patrick. The pound buying you $1.2383 and €1.1381 euros. The price of gold is £1,604.14 an ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,668 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
OK, welcome back. Now, there's less than an hour to go before Donald Trump is due to fly to New York City, where he will appear in court tomorrow. He'll travel from his Mar-a-Lago residence, which those of you watching on TV, I believe, might be able to see on your screens now. Oh, there we go. So that is Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Meanwhile, Trump's plane is on the runway in Florida, waiting to take the former US president to New York. So he's the first former president to face criminal charges after he was indicted last week. And just to let you know that later on, so pretty much when this flight is due to take off, I will be talking live here to John Bolton, who is, of course, very well known, served as the United States National Security Advisor, a key advisor to former President Donald Trump, and has held many jobs within the US government, former Attorney General for President Ronald Reagan, etc. So he knows Trump very well. Look, it's fair to say he doesn't like him, all right, but yeah, I'll be talking to him potentially as that plane takes off. But for more on the detail in the short term, I am joined by political editor Darren McCaffrey, who is in New York City for us now. And Darren, yes, this is where Trump is going to end up facing the music, as you are yourself on camera from in front and behind there, Darren, by the looks of things.
Indeed, yes. I think it's fair to say that we are in the middle of the Trump circus, if I can put it like that, or the media circus around Donald Trump. That is Trump Towers behind me. We're expecting Donald Trump to arrive here, as you say, in a couple of hours' time, later on this afternoon, as he leaves Florida, flies up here to New York. He's likely to spend tonight in his penthouse suite in that tower behind me before travelling down to Lower Manhattan to face that courthouse hearing tomorrow, the first ever current or former US president to be indicted on criminal charges. Quite an extraordinary moment for the United States. And if we have a look around, it's fair to say that I think the eyes of the US, the eyes of the world, New York, will be for the next 48 hours or so, Patrick. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of journalists. It stretches all the way down Fifth Avenue, quite extraordinary. And that is because we're going to find out tomorrow what this charge sheet actually is. We've heard an awful lot about the allegations around Stormy Daniels and so-called business fraud, but we're going to get the actual details tomorrow. We expect that not guilty. He will, though, almost certainly have his mugshot taken. He will almost certainly have his DNA swabbed. It is unlikely, though, he's going to end up in handcuffs. And then we're going to hear from the former president afterwards when he flies back down to Florida to talk to his supporters tomorrow night.
Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor, from what is about to be the scene of one of the most momentous court cases in American history, and that is in global history, arguably, although, of course, there's a long list. Darren, thank you. Darren McCaffrey. Right, OK, so, yes, just a little reminder, we will be bringing you live footage of Donald Trump taking off from Florida and possibly leaving the Mar-a-Lago resort where he is there currently before he flies into New York to face the court and face those charges. So we'll be covering all of that live right here on this show, and we'll also be doing it with John Bolton as well, who is a former top advisor to the Trump White House and to the Reagan White House before that, so it'll be interesting to get his take as that plane takes off. Moving on, though, closer to home, the start of the new tax year. It's estimated that businesses in the UK will be hit with an extra £9 billion a year of taxes. But another concern is the sharp rise in oil prices, which have soared to over 5% as major producers led by Saudi Arabia pledged to cut production. Now, this development poses a new challenge on the cost of living crisis and adds pressure to central banks to control inflation. Let's bring in our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Yes, Liam, look, oil prices first. Contextualise this to me now. What's it going to do to my fuel tank, etc.? What's going on, really? Why is it happening?
Well, when you go and fill up your car or van, I know you like a bit of van driving at the weekend, Patrick, about 55% of what you're paying for is tax, but the other 45% is largely the cost.
I'm sorry about this. I'm very sorry. We're going to go live now, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we are, to the steps of Manchester Crown Court. You understand Olivia Pratt-Corbell's family are making a statement. The murdered 9-year-old girl, Thomas Cashman, was sentenced to 42 years for her murder just now. Let's go to Manchester Crown Court.
Father, John Francis Pratt, who was completely heartbroken. Her older sisters, Kirsty and Kelsey, and the rest of the Pratt family. Following the conviction of Cashman and his sentence today, we would like to say we are happy with the outcome, but we will not be celebrating, as nothing will fill the gap left in our lives following the loss of Olivia. We would like to thank the jury for the correct verdict and the witness who showed courage and stood up for Olivia by giving evidence. We listened to you. We would also like to thank Merseyside Police and the officers from across the country who assisted in the investigation, the legal team, especially Mr McLachlan, for the hard work in getting justice for our Olivia. We would like to thank our flows, Jamie, Justin and Nikki, for the support they have given my brother and family over the hardest 7 months of our lives. Our thoughts are also with the families of Sam Rimmer, Ashley Dale, Jacqueline Rutter and Ellie Edwards. We hope you get the justice your loved ones they deserve. Our greatest hope is for this conviction to lead to more guns, and especially those used in the murder of Olivia, to be handed into the police so that no other families must go through this tragedy. Lastly, I would like to say Olivia Pratt Corbell died a scared 9-year-old, and we hope Cashman is haunted by this knowledge for the rest of his life. Thank you.
OK. So what you were listening to there is a statement from the family of Olivia Pratt Corbell just outside Manchester Crown Court, and that comes in the wake of the news that Thomas Cashman, the man found guilty of Olivia's murder, will serve a minimum of 42 years in prison for that offence and 4 others, including the attempted murder of a fellow gang member, the wounding with intent of Olivia's mum, Cheryl, and 2 firearms offences. So that was the statement from representatives of the family there, of Olivia Pratt Corbell's family. Right, OK, we're going to go back now to what we were talking about with Liam Halligan, who still joins me here, our economics and business editor Liam Halligan with me. And Liam, sorry, you were mid-flow there talking about the oil prices.
Yeah, so when you fill up your car or van, about 55% of what you pay is tax, but a lot of the other 45% is the cost of the actual crude oil. And crude oil overnight went up by a huge 8%. At one point, it was at $85 a barrel, which is a very sharp increase. And this is really tough for the government, all of us, to get our heads around, because oil prices have been coming down over recent months, and that's why petrol and diesel prices have been coming down, helping to hopefully lower inflation in the months ahead, even though diesel prices, as van drivers will know, has been coming down a lot more slowly. But what's happening now is that the OPEC exporters cartel plus Russia, so the Saudis, the Iranians, the Iraqis, the UAE, Mexico, Venezuela, they make up the OPEC exporters cartel. Operating with Russia, they control 90% of global oil reserves. Really powerful. And about half of global oil sales. And what they're doing, Patrick, is they've signalled, that's what's caused this price spike, they've signalled they're going to pump 1 million barrels a day less than they previously were. That's a 1% reduction. We use about 100 million barrels a day across the world.
Yeah.
And that's on top of a 2 million barrel a day reduction that they did a couple of months ago. So OPEC, this is what they're for. They deliberately restrict the supply of oil in order to keep the prices high. That gives the OPEC members more money and more power, and it means Western oil importers, like the UK, have to pay more. That's the way the world works. And just at a time when the Western world's trying to solve inflation, we don't want to do any more interest rate rises. It's harming our banks, it's harming our mortgage holders, harming everyone with debts, our companies. So we want to rely on oil prices coming down to help rescue us from inflation. But they've just gone up, largely because of OPEC.
Good grief, Liam. I mean, it is staggering stuff, isn't it? Look, we are going to have to move on now very quickly, mate, but thank you very much for that. It's Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. There's a lot more that we could have spoken to you about in the world of economics and business there, and we'll hopefully return to that a little bit later on, but it's a fast-moving picture here, ladies and gents, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, given everything that we've had breaking throughout the course of this show. Right, OK, look, I've got loads more coming your way between now and the end of the hour. Who's to blame for the delays at Dover, these catastrophic delays, 17-hour waits? Is it Brexit or is it the lazy French? Not my words. I'm Patrick Christys and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Yeah, welcome back. Now, look, we're just going to go straight back to the steps of Manchester Crown Court and hear from Olivia Pratt-Corbell's mother, Cheryl, who is currently talking.
30th of March 2023, a verdict of guilty, which has confirmed our belief that Cashman murdered our beautiful Olivia. Olivia was just beautiful with her long brown hair and big brown eyes. She was such a social butterfly. She was particularly good with the younger children and was such a caring little girl. Liv was the light of our lives, a sassy, chatty girl who never ran out of energy. She was a character. She was my baby, and she had amazing qualities and knew what she wanted in life. Everyone adored her. She was the baby of our family and my little love, my shadow. Now everything we do and everywhere we go is a constant reminder that she is not there with us. All that promise for her future so cruelly taken away. We can now draw a line under 7 months of agonising torment that we have had to endure at the hands of Cashman. Justice has prevailed and I cannot begin to express our relief. I would like to extend our sincere gratitude and thanks to Mr McLaughlin and Mr Riding, the CPS, all the investigation team and police officers involved in working tirelessly to get this to court. My thanks go to the witnesses who bravely assisted the prosecution case and defied the usual stance of people do not grass. I would especially like to thank our family liaison officers, Detective Constable Louise Wright and Julie Moses, who have worked so hard and professionally with boundless dedication to achieve this result. We welcome the sentence given, but what I can say is that my family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Olivia. We are overwhelmed by the outstanding support of the public during this horrific time and wish to say thank you. We now ask for time and space to try and process what has happened to us over the past few months and most importantly, grieve for our Olivia who was so cruelly stolen from us. Thank you.
OK, so that was the mother of Olivia Pratt-Corbell there, the 9-year-old who was murdered in her own home after Thomas Cashman burst in, attempting to shoot a gang member and shot Olivia. That's her mum there, Cheryl. Now, she also was badly injured in the incident, and it's worth noting as well that Thomas Cashman has been sentenced to a minimum of 42 years in prison, not just for the murder of Olivia, but also as well the wounding with intent of Olivia's mum, who you just heard from there, Cheryl, the attempted murder of fellow gang member Mr. Nee, and 2 firearms offences as well. So that's the latest, what you just heard there. She's asking... Oh, I'm going to go back to Manchester Crown Court again because it's the police now making a statement, so we're going to take you to that live.
He'll be an old man when he is. We heard earlier from Cheryl, Chloe and John of the devastating impact her death has had on all the families and friends. Today's sentence will never bring Olivia back. I again thank the witness who assisted in bringing to justice for Olivia's family. She did the correct thing and she should be proud of herself. The courage and bravery that Olivia's family have shown is in direct contrast to the cowardice shown by Thomas Cashman. I hope that the sentence of 42 years given to Thomas Cashman today will act as a deterrent for anyone who thinks of picking up a gun and putting our communities at risk through their reckless behaviour. This has been a challenging, complex and emotional inquiry. I want to thank and praise the commitment, dedication and sheer determination of the investigation team as they pursued the truth. I want to thank our prosecuting barristers, Mr McLaughlin and Mr Ryden, but reserve special thanks for Maria Kaur from the Crown Prosecution Service for her professionalism and the confidence that she placed in our inquiry team and her support throughout the investigation. Thank you. Thank you all.
OK, so who you just heard from there was DCI Mark Baker of Merseyside Police, and what he wanted to emphasise was the great work that the police had done in bringing Thomas Cashman to justice, 42 years minimum. As he said there, he will be an old man when he gets out of prison, if he gets out of prison. He said that it's been a challenging, complex and emotional inquiry, went on to praise the police, as I've said. Just want to refer you as well to just before that, we heard from Olivia's mum, Cheryl, who was herself wounded, shot during this incident. Cheryl actually said that the life sentence that Thomas Cashman is getting is nothing compared to the actual life sentence that her family are now serving as a result of Olivia no longer being there. But she went on to say something that I think was really important, actually. She specifically thanked the people who gave evidence, who stood up and fronted up and didn't let their, fears, as it were, of the gang culture in Liverpool get the better of them. She said that thank you very much to the people who didn't adhere to that old gangland rule of not grassing and who actually did make sure that justice, in one way or another, was served today, as Thomas Cashman, who didn't even have the bottle or the front to come up to court, to face the music himself in court, to actually get him sentenced to spend 42 years, a minimum of 42 years in prison for those 5 offences. Right, look, it's obviously been a fast-moving show, this, with lots of different bits of breaking news, but we are going to go now to another topic, which is a big debate for us. Thousands of people were forced to wait up to 24 hours at Dover at the weekend. People travelling by coach were stuck in long queues, and Tory MP Tim Loughton said a lack of staff at the French border control was to blame for delays, not Brexit. But Labour leader Keir Starmer said Brexit has had an impact on the disruption. So what's to blame? Joining me now is Tony Smith, former Director General of UK Border Force, and also travel expert Simon Calder. Fantastic, both of you. Good stuff. Tony, I want to bring you up first. Who's to blame, Tony? Is it Brexit? Is it the French? What's going on? Tony Smith, the former Director General of UK Border Force. I believe we might just be having a little bit of an issue with Tony. I wonder if we could maybe bring Simon up instead, or either of them would be absolutely fantastic. Can you imagine being stuck Can you imagine being stuck for 24 hours in a car with screaming kids in the background, or a coach load of kids or something like that? Be a nightmare. We've got Simon Calder. Fantastic. I don't have to waffle anymore. Who's to blame, Simon? Brexit or the French?
Patrick, I don't think blame is the right word. We've got exactly what we asked for, and these are the consequences. We voted democratically to leave the European Union. The deal that we agreed with Europe was that we would impose a hard EU border, just like we've got with that the EU has with Russia and with Turkey in southeast Kent. We said we wanted to put it in a place, you can just see it on the screen now, which is incredibly constrained. It's just a little patch of ground between the White Cliffs and the Channel, and there is simply no room to expand. And if every check takes about 5 times longer than it did previously, because, well, before all you needed to do generally was sort of wave a British passport and they would let you on your way. We said we want to be treated as third country citizens. That means that we
Simon, is it the same?
Passports examined.
Just before I go to Tony, sorry, Simon, is it the same on the French side? I mean, is it the same, Simon, on the French side with French people wanting to come here? Because I'm not hearing reports of massive delays on that side.
Just very quickly, Patrick, that's because the vast majority, well, 2/3 at least of the people are British who are going over. When we come back in, all the UK Border Force wants to do is check that is Patrick and it is his passport. So there's none of the checking dates and looking at your passport to see what's been going on that the French have to do because we've asked them to do it.
All right, Tony, I've got one for you now. Tony, look, we have been hearing reports of there just being kind of one person in the French booth there taking their time over, stamping everything and doing it. Is there any truth to this?
Thing is, Patrick, that there's a big change going on in the way the EU borders are going to be managed in the future. This is called EU Smart Borders Programme. They are now routinely stamping and scanning passports from what we call third country nationals, which we now are, because we're not EU nationals anymore. What we're missing is one thing, Patrick, I would make clear, it's not the fault of the UK Border Force. Delighted to be able to say that for a change, because we don't do any checks in Dover. If there were queues on the French side, you could blame us, but there aren't any. So we're doing remarkably well, the UK Border Force, in all of this. But what we do need to wake up to is technology, Patrick. There are things we can do, things going on in different borders. We can scan passports before travel. We don't have to open every passport anymore, stamp every passport to get on across borders. The huge digital disruption. What we need is collaboration between the Port of Dover, the French, and the technology company. We can have a drive-through border there, no problem, technology-wise. Problem politically. We must get the government, both sides, sitting down, working this through with the port operators and the ferry companies, and we can do it. But that's not happening, I don't think.
All right, look, both of you, thank you. We're very sorry it's short and sweet. I hope you understand. We had a lot of breaking news to get in that hour, so I appreciate your patience with us there. Tony Smith there, former Director General of UK Border Force, travel expert Simon Calder. Look, fingers crossed. I tell you what, maybe you had a long time to listen to that if you've been stuck in a car at Dover with nothing to do for 24 hours but listen to my dulcet tones on your radio. I can only apologise, probably enough to make you drive into the channel, that isn't it? Anyway, right, moving on now. Thomas Cashman has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 42 years for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. That's the big breaker for us today. I'll have more detail on that very shortly. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, hello everybody, Patrick Christys here on GB News. It's just gone 5 o'clock, which means I'm with you for another hour, and it's a big hour. We had this massive breaking news, didn't we, that Thomas Cashman has been sentenced to a minimum of 42 years in prison for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell and 4 other offences. We'll have more reaction to that. Was that sentence strong enough? And get a load of this, because it's a big win, actually, for GB News. The government has promised to not let fear of prejudice or fear of being racist get in the way of actually getting to grips with the grooming gang problem in this country. And it's about time too. We've been banging that drum, and yes, there we go. They said there's nothing racist about telling the truth. Quite right. Okay, moving on from that, Donald Trump. We are on Trump flight watch here on GB News, and we understand that probably in about 10 or 15 minutes time we'll be bringing you live footage of former President Donald Trump taking off from Florida as he makes his way to New York to face the charges there. So we'll bring that to you live with a former top advisor to him. And yes, from one Trump to another, these things write themselves, don't they? Could the way for us to hit our net zero targets be to be harnessing the power of cows' farts? In a way, there's a bit more to it than that. Don't say you don't get an eclectic mix here on GB News. I'm Patrick Christys. Stay tuned. Get your emails coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Look, 2 big ones, really, isn't it? Was that sentence of a minimum of 42 years for Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer long enough? And do you think that racism, fear of being called racist, I should say, has got in the way of prosecuting grooming gangs in the past? gbviews@gbnews.uk. 2 big ones to get your teeth stuck into there. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. Well, our top story on GB News today, the man who murdered 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool has today been sentenced to life in prison and will serve a minimum term of 42 years. Thomas Cashman shot the schoolgirl as he chased a convicted drug dealer into her home in August last year. Olivia's mother said she misses hearing her daughter's voice and would do anything and give anything in the world to hear her chatting again.
Liv was the light of our lives, a sassy, chatty girl who never ran out of energy. She was a character. She was my baby, and she had amazing qualities and knew what she wanted in life. Everyone adored her. She was the baby of our family and my little love, my shadow. Now everything we do and everywhere we go is a constant reminder that she is not there with us. All that promise for her future so cruelly taken away. We can now draw a line under 7 months of agonising torment that we had to we have had to endure at the hands of Cashman. Justice has prevailed and I cannot begin to express our relief.
An emotional Cheryl, the mother of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, speaking outside Manchester Crown Court just a short time ago. Well, also in the news today, the brother of television presenter Philip Schofield has been found guilty of sexually abusing a teenage boy. Timothy Schofield was charged with 11 offences involving a child between October 2016 and October 2019. The 54-year-old has been remanded in custody and will be sentenced next month. Reacting to the verdict, Philip Schofield said, "As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a brother." The Prime Minister has announced a new task force to crack down on grooming gangs. Speaking on a visit to Rochdale, Rishi Sunak said the measures aim to prevent victims and whistleblowers from being ignored by the authorities because of cultural sensitivities or political correctness. That's after the Home Secretary singled out British Pakistani men as particular concerns. Critics say excessively focusing on race could create new blind spots when tackling child abuse.
Specific issue of grooming gangs, we've had several independent inquiries look at the incidents here in Rochdale, but in Rotherham and Telford. And what's clear is that when victims and other whistleblowers came forward, their claims were often ignored by social workers, local politicians, or even the police. And the reason that they were ignored were due to cultural sensitivity and political correctness. Now, that's not right.
Well, speaking exclusively to GB News, Sowella Braverman says her comments on Pakistani men were based on local reviews and reports.
It's not racist to tell the truth about what has been going on here in Rochdale or in Rotherham or in Telford. Local reviews and reports have confirmed that the grooming gangs scandal that has gone on here has been perpetrated by largely British Pakistani men. Now, it's important not to demonise a whole community, and the vast majority of British Pakistanis are law-abiding and straightforward people.
Well, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government has been turning a blind eye to the problem for more than a decade.
So I want a government that recognises the full response that's needed here, and a government that really has been behind the curve now for a decade. And, you know, very many of the measures I was calling for 10 years ago, the government still hasn't done. And it's not tackling online issues. So there's big gaps in something which is 10 years too late. But look, we'll work with anybody to improve the situation.
Teachers in England will go on strike for another 2 days next term after rejecting the latest government pay offer. They'll walk out on the 27th of April and the 2nd of May. 98% of NEU members voted against what they described as an insulting offer of a £1,000 one-off payment plus an average rise of 4.5% for next year. The NEU's General Secretary, Mary Boostert, appealed to the Education Secretary to negotiate a much better deal. In Russia, a woman has been arrested over the death of a prominent pro-war blogger in St. Petersburg. Footage purportedly shows Danya Trepova carrying a box into a cafe where an explosion killed Vladen Tatarsky and injured 32 other people. Police have released a video of her saying she's confessed to the crime. Mr. Tatarsky was a vocal supporter of the war in Ukraine, embedding with troops and providing running commentary of the invasion. The Kremlin has described his death as an act of terrorism. Finland will officially become a member of NATO tomorrow, bringing an end to decades of neutrality. Turkey's parliament approved the move, clearing the way for the country to join the military alliance. Both Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO last year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sweden's bid continues, though, to be blocked by Turkey and Hungary. But the head of NATO says Finland's membership will be beneficial to both.
Now with Finland as a full member, that will further increase Sweden's security and also further integrate Sweden into NATO, because Finland and Sweden are so closely integrated already.
Jens Stoltenberg speaking there. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Lots coming your way in the next hour, ladies and gents, and we start, of course, with the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman has been sentenced to life in prison, minimum of 42 years, for killing Olivia in August last year. Like I've said, it will be a minimum of 42 years before he can be considered for release. Here is what Justice Amanda Yip KC said in court earlier on.
The killing of Olivia Pratt-Corbell is an offence that shocked not only the city of Liverpool, but the nation. Olivia's name is likely to be remembered for many years. She should not be remembered only for her dreadful last moments. Her family have spoken today of Olivia in life and of the hopes and dreams for her future, which were so cruelly snatched away.
And here is what Olivia's mother, Cheryl, had to say outside the courthouse earlier.
That promise for her future so cruelly taken away. We can now draw a line under 7 months of agonising torment that we have had to endure at the hands of Cashman. Justice has prevailed and I cannot begin to express our relief. I would like to extend our sincere gratitude and thanks to Mr McLaughlin and Mr Riding, the CPS, all the investigation team and police officers involved in working tirelessly to get this to court. My thanks go to the witnesses who bravely assisted the prosecution case and defied the usual stance of people do not grass. I would especially like to thank our family liaison officers, Detective Constable Louise Wright and Julie Moses, who have worked so hard and professionally with boundless dedication to achieve this result. We welcome the sentence given, but what I can say is that my family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Olivia. We are overwhelmed by the outstanding support of the public during this horrific time and wish to say thank you. We now ask for time and space to try and process what has happened to us over the past few months and most importantly, grieve for our Olivia who was so cruelly stolen from us. Thank you.
So that was Olivia Pratt-Corbell's mum, Cheryl, there, who was shot in this incident that took place. I'm just going to go very quickly now to a quick email on this, very quickly. What a strong, courageous mum she is, and a dignified lady. I don't know how anyone copes with the horrific loss of life. My thoughts are with her. I just wanted to read that out because I think that sums it up probably better than I could. It's worthwhile noting that Thomas Cashman, the man who committed this string of absolutely horrific offences, has shown no remorse, has shown no admittance of guilt on anything whatsoever, and was so cowardly that he did not come out of the cell into the courtroom today to hear the victim impact statements or face the music from a judge. Let's cross now to Manchester Crown Court and speak to GB News' North West reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been covering this trial from start to finish for us. Sophie, you were in there today as this verdict of the sentence was read out. Just talk to me a bit about this, please.
Well, it's been a highly emotional day, Patrick. This case has obviously been incredibly complex from the very beginning, back in August of last year. We've heard several statements in the last 30 minutes or so outside Manchester Crown Court. We heard from Olivia's auntie, who gave a statement on behalf of her brother and Olivia's father, John Pratt. She thanked the jury, the police and a key witness who all helped to find Cashman guilty. She said their greatest hope now is that this conviction will help to take more guns off the street, finishing by saying Olivia Pratt-Corbell died a scared 9-year-old, and we hope Cashman is haunted by this for the rest of his life. Now, we then heard from Olivia's mother, Cheryl Corbell. She described her daughter as a sassy, chatty girl who never ran out of energy. She told the media here that we can now draw a line under several months of agonising torment we have had to endure at the hands of Cashman. And although she was relieved by the sentence he has now received, she said, "My family and I have already started our life sentence." Finally, we heard from Detective Superintendent Mark Baker from Merseyside Police. He spoke of the bravery shown by the key witness, who we can't name for legal reasons, but who gave critical evidence in this case. He compared her bravery to the cowardice shown by Thomas Cashman. Finally, he said he wants this sentence to act as a deterrent to anyone who's considering picking up a gun. Thomas Cashman has now, of course, been sentenced to 42 years minimum in prison after committing a series of crimes, namely the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell.
Sophie, thank you very much. Sophie Reaper there, GB News' North West of England reporter who was outside Manchester Crown Court. Just worth noting, these sentences are going to run concurrently, and this is why I was asking you whether or not you think this sentence is long enough. It sounds long, doesn't it? Life minimum 42 years, but bear in mind that includes the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in her own home, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, who was the intended target, the wounding with intent of Olivia's mum, Cheryl, and 2 firearms offences. So the sentencing for each of those was 42 years for the murder, 22 years for the attempted murder, 10 years for the wounding with intent, and 18 years for the 2 firearms offences, all rolled into one to mean that it will be 42 years. Do you think that's long enough when you look at those 4 offences, or do you think it is justice? There's a mixed bag that in the inbox at the moment, gbviews@gbnews.uk, but an overwhelming consensus that Thomas Cashman actually, for all the bravado of gang culture, etc., is clearly a coward, could not bring himself up to the courtroom to actually listen to the victim impact statements or face the music from a judge. For what it's worth, as well, as reports are coming in that there's around a £250,000 bounty on his head for his time in prison there. There we go. We're going to go now, though, to a different story. A major win for GB News, and it is a big victory, this. We've been banging the drum as the People's Channel for a topic that, frankly, no other news outlet has been touching with a barge pole, despite the fact that you, the people, massively care about this, and that is the issue of grooming gangs. The government has now vowed to finally crack down on grooming gangs with tougher sentences and new task force as well, but also, get this, the mandatory release of the ethnicity of the people who are charged and found guilty of grooming gangs offences, and that's going to have to be recorded. Why? Well, because Rishi Sunak has said that political correctness will no longer stand in the way of tackling the problem after Sowella Braverman specifically singled out British Pakistani men as being largely responsible for grooming gangs. Home Secretary Sowella Braverman has given an exclusive interview to GB News following our documentary and our investigative report into grooming gangs in the country, conducted by Charlie Peters. Sowella Braverman said that it's not racist to tell the truth.
Ultimately, silence enabled this abuse. Silence on the part of professionals, fear of being called racist, fear about cultural sensitivities, fear about inflaming cohesion in communities. It is absolutely vital that we call out the truth of what's been going on, and that's why mandatory reporting is an important tool in the armoury of measures that we're announcing today. It's not racist to tell the truth about what has been going on here in Rochdale or in Rotherham or in Telford. Local reviews and reports have confirmed that the grooming gangs scandal that has gone on here has been perpetrated by largely British Pakistani men. Now, it's important not to demonise a whole community, and the vast majority of British Pakistanis are law-abiding and straightforward people. But it is also clear to say that in these towns, and I've met victims today who've confirmed as much, bearing out their own experience, that there have been cultural trends in the practices that we've seen, and authorities and professionals have turned a blind eye out of fear of being called racist. Political correctness can no longer be an obstacle to taking action.
Absolutely. People are very quick, aren't they, and very keen to point out minor racial issues with absolutely everything. But when it comes to the fact that grooming gangs has been a hotspot for elements of the British Pakistani community, people want us to just keep quiet about that. Well, no longer. And that is thanks, of course, to GB News' very own investigative reporter there, Charlie Peters, and also now, fundamentally, an announcement by the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister. Joining us is columnist and commentator Samantha Smith, who was herself, sadly, a victim of child sexual abuse and grooming. Look, Samantha, thank you very much. What do you make of the announcements today? There's more police, but there's also going to be no fear of being called a racist, no political correctness getting in the way, stoking racial tensions, all those usual phrases. That's out the window now, and a cold, hard light of reality is supposedly going to be shone on the grooming gang issue. Your views?
I think it's necessary, and people may get upset at Sowella, Braverman or Rishi Sunak because they view this as unnecessarily demonising a community of people. However, as Sowella said, and I'll emphasise it, it isn't racist to tell the truth. At the end of the day, yes, child sexual abuse is predominantly committed by white men because we are a predominantly white nation. However, the fact that in Telford, for example, every single perpetrator that was convicted in Operations Chalice, Operations Delta and Operation Epsilon, which were the child sexual exploitation operations in my town, every single individual was of quote-unquote South Asian heritage and were predominantly described by victims and survivors as being Pakistani. This is not an unnecessary demonisation of Pakistani Muslim British men. This is identifying very real trends and problems within this specific community. And it was reported in the Telford report that those in positions of authority, so for example teachers and social workers and educators, were discouraged from making reports due to quote unquote nervousness about race, and that the police, West Mercia Police, failed in their most basic duty in investigating reports of alleged child sexual exploitation because they were scared of being called racist or bigoted or right-wing, etc., etc. I think that this new announcement, particularly the fact that we are now going to have verifiable data on the ethnicities of perpetrators of child sexual exploitation, is absolutely a necessary step, because no longer will people be able to claim, well, there isn't enough data, there isn't enough verifiable information on whether this is committed by British Pakistani Muslim men, because now it's going to be a mandatory reporting tool.
I mean, it's fascinating, really, the psychology of this, because by deliberately not investigating or prosecuting or reporting on an issue for fear of stoking racial tensions, that, in a way, tells you everything that you need to know about the kind of people who are actually doing a lot of the perpetrating of this, because you wouldn't need to worry about not stoking racial tensions if there wasn't potentially a racial element to it. Samantha, I might have to go very quickly over to, because we're taking live footage from President Trump, I believe. But I believe we've still got Samantha for the second, though, haven't we? Samantha Smith there, who is a columnist and commentator. So just be aware of that, Samantha, in case I interrupt you, because I know it's an emotional topic. But do you feel as though there was racism involved in the actual actions themselves? We talk about no racism against the perpetrators here with hiding behind the that. But was there not racism towards working-class, vulnerable young white girls in all of this?
Absolutely. I mean, in Telford, for example, young girls were called child prostitutes, they were called white slags, they were called packy shaggers. And if the police, West Mercia Police, are able to say this about young, white, predominantly white working class girls, then I'm allowed to say it on TV. This is just me repeating exactly what these individuals who were in positions of power, who were supposedly charged with protecting vulnerable little girls from being raped, exploited and abused, this is what they were saying. So of course there weren't investigations, and of course there weren't prosecutions, of course there weren't charges being brought against these men, because those in positions of power, those who had
Samantha,
the ability...
I'm very sorry. Samantha, I'm very sorry about this. I did raise it. We're going to go live now. Thank you, Samantha Smith there, just reporting about the grooming gang issue. But look, Donald Trump is due to board his private plane very, very shortly and head to New York City. And he's the 45th president of the United States, and he will create history when he appears in court tomorrow. Just a little apology if anyone was offended by any strong language that was used a moment ago there. That is, of course, the language that has been revealed in various different reports, etc., but that's where we are. Anyway, back to Trump now. He will become the first current or former US president to ever be arrested and charged with a crime. I've got some live pictures now for you of President Trump, I think in a motorcade, arriving at an airport there. Yes, there we go. So President Trump has left Florida, Mar-a-Lago, and he will be getting on a plane shortly from West Palm Beach, where he will be flying to face the music in a Manhattan criminal court. It's worth noting as well that we are unaware yet as to the full extent of the charges that Donald Trump is going to face. I'm joined now by John Bolton, who is a former US National Security Advisor under President Trump and a man who's been steeped in American political history himself. John, how are you?
I'm glad to be with you.
Thank you very much. I know that you've been waiting a little while there for us, so I appreciate you hanging on for us. How do you feel, first and foremost, that, well, presumably in a matter of minutes, we are going to be watching former President Donald Trump taking off on a plane about to go and face criminal charges? Your views on that?
Well, as hard as it may seem to believe, Trump has turned this prospective indictment into a political plus for himself. He has condemned the district attorney in Manhattan as politically biased, politically motivated, has said this is part of a long pattern of authorities picking on him because of the positions he advocates, and public opinion polls show that it has garnered for him a significant increase in support. Now, we'll see how this turns out. This is simply the indictment stage. There still has to be a trial. That could be a year off. But it is a measure of Trump's continuing support that, unfortunately, in my view, a lot of Republicans have rallied around him. Now, to be clear, I wouldn't have brought this case. I wouldn't have voted for the district attorney in New York who is bringing it. But it's possible to hold.
Look, can you talk to me about that, John? I just think that's a really key point to drill down on, because look, we've spoken before, John. It's fair to say you're not a massive fan of former President Donald Trump. So I think it's really fascinating to hear you say that you wouldn't have voted for the district attorney who's brought these charges against him, Alvin Bragg, and that you wouldn't have brought the case. So why?
Well, it's possible for two things to be true simultaneously. Thing one, that the prosecutor is politically biased, and thing two, that Donald Trump is guilty of the charge. He is under numerous criminal investigations, one for attempted vote stealing in Georgia, 2 federal investigations for the classified documents matter, and for the January 6th riot. So these 4 criminal investigations, if you ask most observers to rank them 1 to 4 as to how strong they are, this case in New York would have ranked about 6th or 7th. It's a tawdry, sleazy case. It hardly sounds like something worthy of the dignity of a president of the United States. But if he's guilty of it, and it is under New York law, it could be a felony. Nonetheless, that's something that he'll have to defend against in court. Look, he's claiming discrimination, persecution, malicious prosecution, a whole range of things. He'll have a chance to make those arguments in court.
And as you've rightly said there, this has actually acted as potentially quite a good situation for Donald Trump. And some have even said that if he wants to run again to be the President of the United States, which he obviously does, he might actually win from a prison cell.
Well, I think one of the reasons Republicans are so frustrated and so many are attacking the district attorney is that Donald Trump is the Democratic Party's best asset. If he were to get the Republican nomination, it would guarantee that anybody that they nominated would win, and not only win the presidency, but score significant gains in the Senate and the House. So this is, for those who want a responsible conservative Republican nominee, this indictment is not good news.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, what people will be able to see immediately on the screens is the Trump aircraft, Trump Force One. Stay with me, John, if that's all right. Trump Force One. We're expecting Donald Trump to arrive there in a few minutes' time. We did have footage earlier on from Trump leaving Mar-a-Lago, being driven in a motorcade from his home there and going to be taken to that airport that we'll be giving live shots of, and we'll be watching that plane take off, hopefully live here on GB News, presumably in a few minutes' time, as he does arrive there. Is there any little bit of you, John, and again, I want to emphasise, you're not a massive fan of Donald Trump. Is there any bit of you that thinks that this is a bit of a witch hunt, as we see pictures there, by the way, of Trump leaving Mar-a-Lago and being driven to that airport? Do you think there's any bit of this that's a witch hunt, John?
Well, I think it's entirely possible. Look, this district attorney campaigned for office saying he was going to find a way to indict Donald Trump. And, you know, as Lavrentiy Beria, the one-time head of the NKVD in the Soviet Union days, said to Joe Stalin, "You show me the man and I'll show you the crime." So people could reasonably conclude this. Now, we have, as you do in the UK, defenses against prosecutorial misconduct if Trump can prove it. But prosecutors have very broad discretion. And for law and order conservatives, it pinches a little bit to say we want to limit the prosecutor's discretion. They don't have unlimited reach. They do have standards, laws, ethical constraints they have to make. So if Donald Trump can prove that this prosecutor has gone out of bounds, then he should get the case dismissed. We'll see what he has to say about it.
John, thank you very, very much. John Bolton there is a former US National Security Advisor under President Trump. Really appreciate your time today. I know you've been waiting a long time. Massively appreciated. OK, all right. Now, look, what is interesting about that, I think, is the fact that John Bolton doesn't like Trump. He's very open about that. He doesn't like the guy at all. Not going to go quite as far as hate, but it's not far off. And even he's there saying, well, actually, he wouldn't have brought this case. He wouldn't have brought these charges. He can see the angle that maybe this is a bit of a witch hunt. That's interesting. I wasn't really expecting him to say that. So, again, we just want to emphasise we have got live footage of Trump Force One, as it's affectionately known, Trump's aeroplane, which is going to take off from West Palm Springs, and he's going to take him to Manhattan, where he will face arrest and ultimately court as well for these. We, as yet again, don't quite understand or know the true extent of the charges. We know that one of them is in relation to a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels, who is, by the way, also making quite a lot of money off this, as far as we're aware. She's selling merchandise online, believe it or not. That's the aeroplane there. I'm going to New York now. I wish I was, actually. We have sent Darren McCaffrey there, so I'm virtually in New York. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is, yes, there he is, so near Trump Tower, where, as we understand it, Donald Trump is going to be spending the evening before he attends court.
Yeah, indeed. We're going to expect him here, next 3 or 4 hours or so. That flight up from Florida, as you say, he's then going to spend the night in Trump Tower here in New York with, I must say, a couple of protesters, not many so far, but a couple of protesters who are slightly further down the road, and hundreds and hundreds of journalists from across the world. It's fair to say, I think all eyes in America, and indeed in most parts of the world, will be here in New York tomorrow afternoon for that court hearing. He's going to spend tomorrow night in Trump Tower. He's then going to travel down to Lower Manhattan to the courthouse. The first time a US president, a former or current one, has ever been indicted for a criminal offence. He will appear in court, submit his plea of not guilty. We will hear the charge sheet against him. As you say, suggestions, it could up to 30 different charges. He will have his DNA swabbed. He will have his fingerprints taken. He will have a mugshot taken, though we don't think he's going to be in handcuffs. And it's going to be quite the spectacle. Now, we're not entirely sure what we're going to see from inside the courthouse, because there is a bit of a battle taking place between the broadcasters who want this to be on camera and the local authorities. And then after that, after the proceedings here, he's going to fly back down to Florida, Patrick, tomorrow afternoon and address his supporters there tomorrow evening. But this is a process that is not going to be settled in the next couple of days, or indeed even in the next couple of months. This is a legal process that could well drag in to next year, if not the year after that.
Thank you, Darren. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor from New York. And what you're watching there is footage of Donald Trump's aeroplane, which presumably will be taking off very, very shortly. Look, loads more to come between now and 6 o'clock. Schools in England could face strikes into the autumn after members of the largest education union in the UK overwhelmingly rejected the government's pay offer and never accuse us of ignoring the stories that really matter to you. I, believe it or not, will be asking whether or not scientists have finally found a way to stop cows farting. And this actually could be the missing link when it comes to us hitting our net zero target. So there we go. But first, it's your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story today on GB News: Thomas Cashman, who murdered 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool, has today been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term to serve of 42 years. He shot the schoolgirl as he chased a convicted drug dealer into her home in August last year. Outside court a short time ago, Olivia's mother said her daughter was adored by all, and justice has prevailed.
Liv was the light of our lives, a sassy, chatty girl who never ran out of energy. She was a character. She was my baby, and she had amazing qualities and knew what she wanted in life. Everyone adored her. She was the baby of our family and my little love, my shadow. Now everything we do and everywhere we go is a constant reminder that she is not there with us. All that promise for her future so cruelly taken away.
Cheryl Corbell speaking there. Well, in other news today, the brother of TV presenter Philip Schofield has been found guilty of sexually abusing a teenage boy. Timothy Schofield was charged with 11 offences, including with a child between October 2016 and October 2019. The 54-year-old has been remanded in custody and will be sentenced next month. Well, reacting to that verdict, Philip Schofield said, "As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a brother." The Prime Minister says victims of grooming gangs and whistleblowers have been ignored in the past because of cultural sensitivities and political correctness. Rishi Sunak outlined new measures to crack down on the problem during a visit to Rochdale, including the announcement of a new task force. And thousands of schools may be forced to close for 2 days next term after teachers in England announced fresh strike action. Teachers have announced they'll walk out on the 27th of April and the 2nd of May after rejecting the latest government pay offer. 98% of NEU members voted against a £1,000 payment on top of this year's pay rise and a 4.5% increase for the next school year. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Quick look first at today's markets. This snapshot showing you the pound will buy you $1.2394 and €1.1381 euros. The price of gold, £1,605.75 an ounce. And the FTSE today closing at 7,673.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
OK, welcome back. Now, schools are to face more strikes this spring, as this morning teachers voted to reject the government's pay offer. An overwhelming 98% of members of the National Education Union voted to turn down the deal. And it's not surprising, as the union had urged its members to do so, calling the pay offer insulting. The government says it offered £1,000 in a cash payment on top of an average 5.4% pay rise last September, plus an average 4.5% rise for next year. Just going to read those numbers again for you. The government says that it offered a £1,000 cash payment on top of an average 5.4% pay rise from last September, plus an average 4.5% rise for next year. Right, so there we go. And that it now has no plans to make an improved pay offer, and teachers will be worse off because of it. Joining me now is Anis Garfield, education commentator and former GCSE A and O-level examiner. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Anis, would you have voted against this then? Do you think the teachers are right to strike?
No, I don't. It's a vocation. Our children, our pupils in our schools depend on them. Our teachers are their ministers. And with COVID and the various interruptions, I wish I didn't have my screen like that. It's very, very tragic. You don't get... my vicar's never gone on strike. The children do not need coming up to their exams. They do not need any further interruption in their education. And it leads to all sorts of concomitant problems. What are their parents going to do? How are they going to arrange care for their children, for their jobs? It raises huge more problems. And I think that teachers should think better. That maybe their conditions aren't as they like, but they should have thought of that before they joined the teaching profession. And they're very good at it. And I also think that if their conditions of work were improved and they had more time planning their school lessons for their children and not so much paperwork, it would be better.
Do you think that teachers are already paid enough for the job that they do?
Well, they do get 3 holidays a year, and they do sometimes have to work in the evening, but what job doesn't involve evening work? I think they probably are, and if they're not, there's another way of going about it. They could talk to our education minister, as she's asked them to do, more, rather than jeopardise the careers, the lives of children who have one go through their education. And if that's interrupted, if that's muddled, it's very hard on our children.
Look, Anis, thank you very, very much. And I'm sorry this is a bit short and sweet, but we've had a lot of breaking news to get into today. And you said that you didn't like your camera angle there, but it's looking more than OK to me, Anis. So thank you very much. There's Anis Garfield there, education commentator. And former GCSE A and O-level examiner. Well, we'll have Anis back on and talk in a bit more detail about the teacher strike another day, because I want to go live now. We're going back to America, I think, people. We're going to West Palm Beach in Florida because we've got footage of President Donald Trump's plane on the tarmac at that airport. And what you'll be able to see there is the motorcade, a motorcade arriving. Look, bit of context for you. The former president has left Mar-a-Lago, which is that sprawling beachfront residence, isn't it, and members-only club in Palm Beach, Florida. And he is going to leave Florida and get on that plane and fly over to Manhattan to face the music, frankly, in a courtroom. He's going to be accompanied, and this is why you can see such a massive concade of vehicles there, by Secret Service agents from the moment that he leaves Mar-a-Lago. So this was one of the conditions, by the way, of him not being put in handcuffs, was that he would be accompanied by Secret Service agents at all times. So he has now left Mar-a-Lago, that beachfront place, and was being driven to the airport. So he's flanked by a load of Secret Service agents who will be in some of those cars that you've just seen. And there's dozens and dozens of these people. They need to make sure that that trip is secure. So what's going to happen is, and we'll see this in a matter of moments, is former President Donald Trump getting on that plane, Trump Force One as it's known as, before he flies over to Manhattan, where he will present himself. We understand that he's going to spend the evening in Trump Tower. We've got Darren McCaffrey in New York awaiting that arrival. There will be protests. There will be supporters. It will probably kick right off. We can all see that coming a mile off, can't we? And then tomorrow, Trump will basically be in court. And we will find out, ladies and gentlemen, because we're in the dark at the moment, we will find out exactly what he's being charged with. So, yes, those are live shots of West Palm Beach, Florida, where we are expecting that plane to take off in probably a few minutes' time, as and when former President Donald Trump gets on it. Oh, just a little bit of info, very quickly, by the way. It's Trump Force One. It's a Boeing 757 for all you plane enthusiasts out there. And apparently, how much do you reckon it cost? $100 million, supposedly, and that was back in 2011. So can you imagine what it's worth now? There we go. All right, OK, well, look, we'll give you all the latest from that as when we get it. We're going to keep a close beady eye, aren't we, on that? Moving on, Sowella Braverman has singled out British-Pakistani men as she discussed a crackdown on grooming gangs. Was she right to do that? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing here now is Trump Force One, Donald Trump's personal aircraft at West Palm Beach in Florida at the airport there, and it is moving in position, potentially for takeoff. Look, just in case you're wondering why on earth this is happening, Donald Trump is going to fly from Florida to New York's LaGuardia Airport on that private plane. And it's going to take him around 3 hours. And when he gets to LaGuardia, he's going to be taken to Trump Tower all the time, all the while. He's going to be flanked by Secret Service agents. He's going to take the evening at Trump Tower, which is about a 45-minute drive through Queens, apparently, from the airport over the East River into Manhattan. And then what's going to happen tomorrow is that from Trump Tower, he's going to be taken to Manhattan Criminal Court buildings, again with a major security operation involved, non-stop Secret Service agents all around him all the time. That journey will take around 30 minutes. We don't know if President Trump is going to make any remarks to the cameras or what's going to happen. New York police officers are going to be surrounding him at all times. He is then going to officially be arrested and face charges. Again, I want to stress that we do not know yet, nobody knows yet, certainly in the media or outside of a very small circle of people, exactly what President Trump is going to be charged with. There's rumours that it might be around 30 counts. We'll have to wait and see. Look, we know that at least one of those is in relation to some hush money that was paid to a former adult star actress, porn star, Stormy Daniels, of around $130,000. That was made in the run-up to President Trump's initial presidential campaign, and the noises about that are the fact that that in itself is not illegal, but the way that it may or crucially may not have been published is what is actually up to play for here. So that aircraft that you're looking at now is Trump Force One. It is on the airport, on the tarmac there at West Palm Beach in Florida. And what we're expecting is any moment, anyway, President Trump to get on that and then that plane take off. I just want to give you an interesting line that has just come through to me. It's just come through to me from a White House spokesperson who is saying that they are ready and prepared for violence if indeed there are protests and counter-protests, etc. Now, this is fascinating because Donald Trump has a fanatical fan base and he is by far and away the Republicans' voters' top choice to be the next president of the United States, to be the next leader of the Republican Party, to lead them into the next presidential election over there. And what is fascinating is that already, since news of his arrest and since news of him being taken to New York to face criminal proceedings broke, $5 million of donations have come in to his campaign. Now, that is especially incredible, considering that a lot of those will be very small donations. There'll be ordinary men and women out there in America, maybe not with a huge amount of money to their name. So it's a lot of small donations coming in. And this actually is leading people to think that this could do President Trump, former President Trump, more good than bad, really, because his popularity appears to be going up as a result of this. And isn't it amazing psychologically to think about the fact that this guy, for a lot of people, is untouchable? He's bracketing this as a witch hunt. I had John Bolton on earlier on, and a lot of people who are watching and listening will know John Bolton. He's a former United States National Security Advisor, and he also served under Reagan. He is no fan or friend of former President Trump. They had a big falling out, and indeed he was ousted. He says he left, but there you go. And he was saying that he wouldn't have brought these charges against Trump, and he doesn't really support the individual who has, which is the district attorney there in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, who has been reported to have had previously very close ties with the Democrat Party. It has played right into people's hands to say that this is a political witch hunt against President Trump. And you know what? It is working, because, like I said, those donations have gone through the roof. $5 million donations to his campaign, and his popularity in the polls is surging. But when we hear now about them being prepared for violence in New York, I think that is fascinating. And it really stems from the January the 6th scenes, the storming of the Capitol. It is fascinating to see that, you know, since that's turned out, it does look as though a lot of people were essentially waved through there. There wasn't a massive security operation to stop them, was there? But there we go. There are risks that Trump's fan base will come out in force. What you are looking at now is that plane Trump Force One at West Palm Beach in Florida, and it is moving on the runway. I'm going to go to New York now. I hope we can keep that plane in shot as well, because we desperately want to make sure we get that taking off. But Darren McCaffrey is in New York for us, our political editor, who is near Trump Tower. And Darren, I just want to know what you make of that line that apparently the White House is saying, oh, they're ready for violence. What's all that about?
Yeah, really interesting that in this sense that you would expect, I suppose, the New York Police Department to be ready for violence, though, you know, this is a city responsibility. I think what's more interesting, Patrick, in some ways, is just actually how few people we've seen here. I mean, there are, across the road outside Trump Tower, maybe a couple of dozen people who've held up Trump signs. We saw that in Mar-a-Lago yesterday and overnight as well. But we're not exactly seeing thousands or tens of thousands of people on the streets. Now, that may well change tomorrow. There is an organised protest in New York at 12 noon tomorrow, and there's a hell of a lot of police officers. Lots of NYPD officers have told essentially to cancel their leave and to be on duty. So this will be a massive security operation, be no doubt about that. Just to give you a sense of the geography here, we're quite near Central Park in Manhattan, at the kind of upper ends, if you like. Trump Tower behind me, that's where he's going to come tonight. And then later on tomorrow, he's going to travel to Lower Manhattan, as you say, about a 30-minute drive down the road to that courthouse. So all in all, as I say, Patrick, you know what, we've not really seen many protesters so far. We're going to have to wait and see for what happens tomorrow. And while there is a sense that this is played into Donald Trump's hands in portraying this as a narrative of witch hunt, and it definitely seems to increase his popularity among those Republicans, whether he's the official nominee for president next year, I think the bigger question is, how does it play among the general US population? And at the moment, that's yet to be seen.
And like you said there, Trump's base is really rallying. We're taking live shots from the airport in West Palm Beach now as President Trump's plane, well, it appears to me anyway, to be preparing to take off. We'll have more detail on that for you. The motorcade that left Mar-a-Lago earlier, flanked with several Secret Service agents, and, of course, that really being the reason why he will not be going anywhere in handcuffs as part of a deal negotiated by his legal team. As long as there was security detail there, members of the police, members of the Secret Service, Special Forces, whatever you want to call them, with him at all times, then there is no chance really that he's going to go anywhere, is there? And that was why they were saying that he was not going to be taken anywhere in handcuffs. Darren, just remind me, sorry, again, of where you are now and what the scene is, because they were saying, weren't they, the White House has come out and said, well, we're prepared for violence, but we can just see, we saw a couple of Trump flags there in the background at the airport here, but where you are now, from what you're saying, bear in mind it's only a 3-hour flight from where he is in Florida to New York, to near where you are. There are not, according to you, massive amounts of protests from either political persuasion taking place. Isn't this fears of violence might be a bit overblown in themselves, even maybe just ramping up the drama?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you there are multiple levels more journalists from across the world than there are anyone who seems to be politically persuaded one way or another. I mean, there are, I'd say, a couple of dozen supporters of Donald Trump, but you know, we're not seeing any mass protests. The police are always, I think, prepared for violence. I mean, I'd like to know kind of probably the context of that statement from the White House, not least of all because it's not actually their responsibility, it's the NYPD's responsibility here in New York. And that's also interesting about these criminal charges, that in many ways, we don't have, as you've rightly pointed out, the charge sheet, or believe that this is the these actions in relation to what may well be federal crimes. So it's going to be a really, really complex case. But be no doubt, I mean, the significance of this for you and I, kind of Brits, if you like, Patrick, rather than Americans, Impact this could have on the presidential election. We've never been here before in terms of our president facing criminal indictment, and it will be that impact on the voters of the United States that will be crucial for all of us elsewhere in the world.
Darren, thank you very, very much. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor in New York. Now, look, we have basically run out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Jubes is here with me, though. Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. You've got about 20 seconds. What's going on?
I'm absolutely gripped to that. I do like, in cases like this, following the aeroplanes.
I know.
I like to see it at all times. Where are they? What they're doing? What they're up to?
Yeah.
Speaking of what people are up to, Dover at the weekend, absolute mess. Is it the fault of us, the pesky Brexiteers, or not? Also, the whole grooming gang thing. Of course, I'll be looking at that. Rent controls.
All right. Good stuff. Well, hey, what's not to like, ladies and gentlemen? I've been Patrick Christys. This is GB News, and we are the People's Channel.
Hello there, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast, and the week ahead looking like a mostly dry start for many places. Will turn wetter for a time midweek, but probably becoming drier again in time for the Easter weekend. And the fine start to the week is all courtesy of this area of high pressure, which is extending down from Scandinavia across the British Isles, keeping for now these weather fronts in the Atlantic at bay. So it's a lovely end to the day for many places through Monday afternoon into the early evening. Lots of sunshine around. This will translate then overnight Monday into Tuesday into some quite lengthy clear periods for many places. The odd shallow mist or fog patch can't be ruled out for many places. It's dry and clear. And like as we saw in the start of this morning, well, it'll be another cold start into Tuesday morning with temperatures in towns and cities close to or a little bit below freezing. Out in the countryside, though, a few degrees cooler than this. Now, not quite so cold for parts of Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, because here we've got the weather front just edging in overnight and into the Tuesday morning, bringing a few splashes of rain, nothing particularly heavy, but it will be a cloudier day here. The sunshine turning a bit hazy across eastern Scotland after a bright start, likewise across Western England, parts of West Wales as well. But further east, plenty of sunshine once again, and after that chilly start, those temperatures recovering quite nicely. And we'd like